What would you do if a billionaire offered you $5 million to marry her, and the only person standing between you and financial ruin was your 8-year-old daughter? Owen Mercer never imagined the worst day of his life would begin with saving a stranger's life. Charlotte Ashford never imagined the coldest business deal she'd ever proposed would be destroyed, not by lawyers, not by rivals, but by a little girl who saw straight through her. Money, grief, power, and one child who refused to lie. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see how far this story travels. The elevator doors opened on the 14th floor of Mercer Building Services' downtown Chicago office at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning, and Owen Mercer stepped out carrying two things: a cracked thermos of cold coffee and the particular expression of a man who hasn't slept properly in 3 years. He was 32. He looked 38. Not in a dramatic movie poster kind of way, just in the way that certain men carry exhaustion like a second skeleton. Something structural, something you can see in how they hold their shoulders, and how long it takes them to smile at something that's actually funny. The office floor was mostly empty this early. 2 junior estimators hunched over monitors at the far end. Maria from accounting was already at her desk, which surprised nobody. Maria had been at her desk before everyone else for 11 years and showed no signs of stopping. She glanced up when Owen passed. "Rough night?" "Rough month," he said without breaking stride. He made it to his office, a small glass-walled space that faced a parking structure rather than the actual skyline, which told you exactly where Owen sat in the company hierarchy, dropped his bag, and stood there for a moment just staring at nothing. On his desk, a stack of folders he hadn't finished reviewing, a framed photo of a woman with dark curly hair laughing at something off camera, a crayon drawing, laminated, that said "Daddy is the best" in letters of varying sizes, because Lily had still been working on the word daddy at the time, and he hadn't had the heart to correct the spelling before she laminated it herself with the craft kit she'd gotten for Christmas. He sat down, opened his laptop, stared at the screen. Then he opened the email he'd been avoiding for 4 days. Dear Mr. Mercer, this letter serves as formal notice that your mortgage account number 4471-B is now 94 days past due. Despite previous correspondence and attempts to reach you by phone, we have received no response to our proposed repayment arrangements. If payment in full, or a signed agreement for the modified repayment plan, is not received within the next 21 business days, we will be required to initiate foreclosure proceedings on the property located at 2214 Weston Avenue, Chicago, Illinois. Owen read it twice, closed the laptop. He picked up his coffee and took a sip before remembering it was cold. He put it back down. He sat there another minute, doing the math he'd already done 200 times. The same numbers, the same dead ends. The medical debt from Elena's illness had eaten through their savings first, then his emergency fund, then the home equity loan he'd taken out to cover the gaps the insurance hadn't. After Elena died, there had been funeral costs. Then Lily needed a therapist. She was 6 years old and she'd watched her mother disappear over 8 months. Of course she needed a therapist. Then Owen's car died and he needed a car to get Lily to school and himself to work, and he'd financed it because what other option was there? The numbers never changed. They just got worse. He had 3 weeks. He stood up, straightened his collar, and went to check on the Morrison Project files because the work didn't stop. It never stopped. And stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant doing this math again. Owen had started Mercer Building Services 6 years ago, right after Lily was born, with $11,000 in startup capital and an idea that mid-sized commercial properties were being chronically underserved by both the big facility management corporations and the scrappy one-man operations. He'd been right about that. The company had grown steadily, not spectacularly, but steadily, to the point where he employed 22 people and managed service contracts for 31 properties across the greater Chicago area. What he hadn't accounted for was Elena getting sick in year 3. Not because it was unforeseeable. It was just the kind of thing you don't fully plan for, the same way you don't fully plan for a tornado even when you live in tornado country. You know it's possible. You hope it happens to someone else, and then one morning your wife tells you there's a lump, and the someone else is you. Elena Mercer, born Elena Vasquez, changed her name when they married, not because Owen asked, but because she wanted to, She said she liked how it sounded. Elena Mercer, like a character in a book, had been 30 years old when she was diagnosed. Stage 2, which sounded manageable, then Stage 3, which sounded less manageable. Then the clinical trial that was supposed to be different. Then the morning 18 months later when Owen sat in a plastic chair in a hospital corridor while Lily slept in the waiting room under his jacket, and a doctor whose name he still couldn't remember told him that they'd done everything they could. She was 31. Lily was 5. Owen was 30. He got through the Morrison files. He returned 2 phone calls, both of them relatively painless. He ate lunch at his desk, a sandwich he'd made that morning, peanut butter and apples, Lily's favorite combination that he'd accidentally started making for himself too, and read 3 contractor proposals that all came in 15% over budget. At 2 in the afternoon, he got a call from the school. "Mr. Mercer, this is Donna Reese, the school secretary at Westbrook Elementary. Lily is fine, she's not hurt, but she had a bit of an upset this morning, and her teacher thought it might be good if you could—" "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Owen said, already reaching for his jacket. Lily Mercer sat in the school secretary's office in a chair that was slightly too big for her, feet dangling, looking at her shoes with the focused attention of someone trying very hard not to cry. She was 8 years old and she had her mother's dark curly hair and Owen's stubborn jaw, and a gap between her 2 front teeth that the dentist said would close on its own eventually. She was wearing a yellow t-shirt with a cartoon bee on it and navy corduroys and the blue sneakers she'd insisted on at the store 3 months ago and wore every single day without exception. Owen crouched down in front of her. "Hey, Bug." Lily looked up. Her eyes were red around the edges but dry. She'd been crying earlier, he could tell, but she'd pulled herself back together. She did that. She'd been doing that since she was 6 years old, and it broke his heart every single time. "Hi, Dad." "What happened?" She looked at her shoes again. "Emma Dalton said her family is going on vacation to Disney World over spring break." A pause. "I said we weren't going anywhere, and she asked why, and I said, because we don't have money, and she said that was sad, and I said it wasn't sad, and then I said something I probably shouldn't have said." Owen tried not to smile. "What did you say?" "I told her Disney World was a capitalist exploitation of childhood nostalgia." Owen pressed his lips together. "Where did you hear that?" "You said it, last year when the commercial came on." He had absolutely said that. "Okay. And then what happened?" "Emma cried. And then I felt bad. And then I said I was sorry. And then I started crying." Lily picked at a thread on her corduroy leg, which was embarrassing. "Crying's not embarrassing, Bug. It is when you're the one who made the other person cry first." He couldn't argue with that. He reached over and squeezed her knee. "You want to get ice cream on the way home?" Lily looked up. "We're not supposed to spend money on things like that right now." The fact that she knew this, that she'd internalized it so thoroughly at 8 years old that she had to be given permission to want ice cream, was a specific kind of pain Owen had learned to carry quietly. "We can afford ice cream," he said. "Come on." "What?" That night, after ice cream and homework and dinner and a chapter of the book they were reading together, The Phantom Toll Booth, Lily's 3rd time through, Owen's 2nd, he put her to bed and sat in the hallway outside her door and listened to the silence of the house settle around him. 2214 Weston Avenue. They'd bought it together, he and Elena. It was a 1940s bungalow in a neighborhood that was still figuring out what it wanted to be, some blocks going upscale, some staying stubbornly ordinary, their blocks somewhere in between. It had 3 bedrooms and 1.5 bathrooms and a backyard with an enormous oak tree that Lily had already named Gerald. The kitchen needed updating. One of the upstairs windows was slightly drafty in winter. The basement flooded a little bit in a bad rain. Elena had walked through it and said, "I love it, it's imperfect, and so are we," and they'd put in an offer the next day. Owen sat in the hallway and thought about losing it. Thought about telling Lily they had to move. Thought about someone else living in this house, in these rooms, in the space where Elena had gotten sicker and then died and then left them with her presence still somehow in every wall. He didn't have a plan. He had 21 business days. He went to bed and didn't sleep. The Ashford Global Tower was 47 stories of steel and glass that stood on Michigan Avenue like a very expensive argument for taking yourself seriously. It was the kind of building that didn't try to be beautiful. It simply was. in the brutal, self-certain way that serious money often is, and it expected you to adjust your perception accordingly. Charlotte Ashford had built it. Not literally, obviously, but she'd commissioned it, funded it, named it, and occupied the top 3 floors with her private offices. She'd been 26 when she first proposed the project, and 30 when the ribbon was cut, and she remembered thinking, standing there in front of television cameras and a city council that had never quite known what to make of her, that it was the most permanent thing she'd ever made. She'd been right. Most things in Charlotte's life were not permanent. She was 30 years old now, which the business press thought was impressive and Charlotte thought was simply accurate. Young billionaire was the phrase they used most frequently, usually with a qualifier. Formidable young billionaire, polarizing young billionaire, brilliant and terrifying young billionaire. She'd read them all. She found them largely irrelevant to the work. The work was what mattered. It was the only thing that consistently made sense. At 7:15 on the morning that would change her life, Charlotte was already 2 hours into her day. She'd reviewed the overnight reports from their operations in Singapore and Frankfurt, answered 17 emails, and eaten half a protein bar that she'd forgotten to finish. She was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window in her office, looking out over the city's early morning gray, when her assistant Marcus appeared in the doorway. "The Vantage Capital team landed 20 minutes ago," he said. "They've confirmed the breakfast meeting at 9. "Good. Also," Marcus paused in a way that meant the next thing was something she wouldn't like. "Statler's piece ran this morning." Charlotte didn't move from the window. "How bad?" "Bad enough. He has sources claiming the Vantage deal includes a tax structure that, and I'm quoting, deliberately exploits regulatory gaps in 3 offshore territories. He describes you specifically as, I can imagine how he describes me. Do you want me to get legal on the phone?" Charlotte finally turned from the window. She was not a physically imposing person. Average height, lean, with dark blonde hair she wore pulled back in a way that was functional rather than styled, and gray eyes that people often described, in retrospective accounts, as difficult to read. She was not beautiful in any particular or obvious way, but she had the kind of face that made you pay attention, the kind of stillness that made rooms quieter when she entered them. "Get me Vantage's communications director first," she said, "before legal. If they're spooked by the Statler piece, I need to know that before 9 o'clock, not after." "Of course." Marcus was already moving. Charlotte looked back out the window. Below, Michigan Avenue was filling up. Cabs and ride shares and morning joggers, and the first tourists of the day with their phones out for the architecture. Regular Tuesday. Regular city. Something about it felt, in that particular moment, very distant from where she was standing. She shook it off. She had work to do. The Vantage Capital merger was the largest deal of Charlotte's career. At $4.3 billion, it represented not just a financial milestone, but a structural one. The acquisition would give Ashford Global a footprint in Southeast Asian infrastructure development that no American company their size had established before. Charlotte had been working toward it for 3 years. She'd flown to Singapore 4 times in the last 18 months alone. She knew the financial architecture of the deal better than anyone on either side of the table. What she hadn't anticipated was Raymond Statler. Statler was a financial journalist at a publication called Capital Current that had modest readership but outsized influence in the specific circles that mattered to a deal like this. He had a reputation for being relentless and occasionally wrong, which was a dangerous combination. The piece he'd published that morning, Charlotte skimmed it in 90 seconds on her phone while Marcus arranged the Vantage call, was structured like a grenade. Real details mixed with inferences mixed with 2 anonymous sources whose quotes were damaging precisely because they were impossible to specifically refute. The core accusation was that the Vantage merger's financial structure was engineered to move profits through shell entities in 3 jurisdictions in a way that was technically legal but practically a form of tax evasion at scale. The secondary accusation, buried in paragraph 8 but the one that would actually stick, was that Charlotte knew about it and had personally approved the structure. The first accusation was debatable. The deal's structure was aggressive but defensible. The second was a lie. But it was the kind of lie that attached itself to people. The kind that made powerful men with 10-figure checkbooks pick up their phones and start asking questions Charlotte would have to spend weeks answering. She took the Vantage call. Richard Ewan, their communications director, was careful and professional and said all the right things about their continued commitment to the partnership. He also asked, with the studied casualness of someone who'd been briefed to ask it precisely this way, whether Charlotte had any concerns about the current media environment surrounding the transaction. No, Charlotte said, which was the only answer available to her. After she hung up, she sat at her desk for a moment with her hand still on the phone. She needed the meeting at 9 to go perfectly. She needed Harrison Cade, Vantage Capital's 73-year-old founder, and the only person whose opinion actually mattered in this deal, to look at her across that breakfast table and decide that what he'd read that morning was noise rather than signal. She needed everything to work. It almost all fell apart before 9 o'clock. Ashford Global's building, for all its architectural authority, had one persistent problem. The service elevator on the north end of the 31st floor had been behaving erratically for 3 weeks. Maintenance had looked at it twice, declared it within acceptable parameters, and moved on. This was, as events would demonstrate, an insufficient assessment. Owen was on the 31st floor. He'd been there since 7:30, supervising the quarterly HVAC inspection for Ashford Global, one of Mercer Building Services' longest-standing contracts, a relationship that had begun 4 years ago when Owen cold-called the building manager and offered a rate 15% below their current provider. He'd kept the contract through good work and careful attention and the kind of quiet reliability that buildings depended on more than their owners usually acknowledged. He knew the building well. He knew which floors had the temperamental thermostats and which loading dock entrance the freight elevator serviced, and that the service elevator on the north end of the 31st floor had been making a sound that didn't sit right with him. He'd flagged it to the building manager 2 weeks ago. "I'll put in a work order," the building manager, Dave, had said. Owen had checked back last week. The work order was in progress. He'd meant to follow up again. He was standing near the north end corridor reviewing a thermostat reading on his tablet when he heard the elevator doors open behind him. He didn't turn immediately. He was in the middle of recording a number. Then he heard the sound, a grinding mechanical complaint from above, something cable adjacent and deeply wrong, followed by a sharp metallic crack. He turned. Charlotte Ashford had stepped halfway out of the service elevator. He didn't know who she was yet. He'd never met her. She was just a woman in a charcoal blazer with a phone to her ear. When the elevator shuddered. Not a small shudder. A full-body mechanical convulsion, the kind that meant something had failed. The doors began to close on her. Not slowly. Fast. Owen moved without deciding to. It was less a choice than a reaction, the kind of physical response that bypasses cognition entirely. He crossed the 8 feet between them, got a hand on each door, and pulled. The doors, heavy industrial elevator doors, not the gentle lobby kind, pushed back with real force. He felt it in his shoulders, his wrists, his back. "Move," he said, or something like it. He wasn't entirely sure what he said. Charlotte moved. She stepped back into the corridor in one sharp motion, and Owen released the doors a half-second later, and they slammed shut with a sound like a gunshot. There was another grinding noise from the shaft, then a long mechanical groan, and then nothing. They stood there for a moment. Charlotte had her phone in her hand and her back against the wall, and she was looking at him with an expression Owen couldn't quite read, not quite fear, not quite its absence. "Are you—" he started. "I'm fine," she said. Automatic, immediate. The voice of someone accustomed to not being not fine. Owen looked at the elevator doors, then back at her. "That elevator's been— I flagged it 2 weeks ago. The cable tensioner has been—" He stopped. "I'm sorry. Are you sure you're all right? Your arm—" Charlotte looked down. She'd caught her arm in the door before Owen had gotten there. She hadn't even noticed. There was a red mark forming, not quite a bruise yet, just below her elbow. "I'm fine," she said again. But this time she was looking at the mark too. Marcus appeared at the end of the corridor at a near run. "Charlotte, I heard— Are you—" "I said I'm fine." She straightened up. Whatever had flickered across her face a moment ago was gone. "Call building maintenance and have them take this elevator offline immediately. And I need the HVAC supervisor." She looked at Owen. "Who are you?" "Owen Mercer. Mercer Building Services. We manage the HVAC contract for—" "I know who manages the HVAC contract." She was looking at him with that unreadable expression again, evaluating something, though he couldn't tell what. You flagged the elevator 2 weeks ago. A pause. And nobody fixed it. No. Charlotte looked at Marcus. Get me Dave Kowalski. Dave Kowalski was the building manager. Marcus nodded and disappeared. Charlotte looked back at Owen. Thank you, she said. It came out slightly stilted, like a phrase in a foreign language she was technically fluent in, but rarely practiced. Sure, Owen said. She nodded once, pulled her blazer straight, and walked away. Owen stood there another moment, then went back to his thermostat reading. His hands were shaking slightly. He noticed this with a kind of detached interest, not because the situation hadn't been frightening, but because he'd stopped having expected reactions to frightening things around the time Elena got sick. His body had recalibrated somewhere along the way. Emergencies happened. You dealt with them. The shaking came after. He finished his notes. He coordinated with his 2 technicians, Marco and Jeanette, on the remaining units. He completed the inspection by 10:15 and submitted the report to the building manager's office, with a note, polite but not ambiguous, that the service elevator on the north end of the 31st floor represented a liability and should be taken out of service pending full mechanical review. He left the building at 10:30. He had 2 more sites to check before 3 o'clock, and then he needed to pick up Lily by 4. He did not expect to hear from anyone at Ashford Global again before the next scheduled service date. He was wrong about that. The call came at 8:17 the following morning, while Owen was making Lily's lunch. Mr. Mercer? The voice was Marcus's. Professional, measured, efficient. Ms. Ashford would like to schedule a meeting with you at your earliest convenience. Today, if possible. Owen set down the bread he was holding. About the elevator? A very brief pause. Not exactly. She'd like to discuss a business proposition. She's available at 2 o'clock this afternoon or alternatively at 10 tomorrow morning. Owen looked at Lily, who was eating cereal at the kitchen table and reading a library book simultaneously, a skill she'd mastered at age 7 and deployed constantly. 2 o'clock, he said. Charlotte Ashford's office occupied a corner of the 47th floor and had windows on 2 sides and almost nothing else in the way of decoration. A large desk, clean and almost empty. 2 chairs. A sideboard with a water carafe. A single framed print on the east wall. An aerial photograph of a city Owen didn't immediately recognize. That looked more like a document than an aesthetic choice. Charlotte herself was standing when he arrived, not sitting at her desk, but by the window, looking out at the lake. She turned when he entered. Mr. Mercer? She gestured toward the chairs. Sit down. Owen sat. She didn't. She moved to behind her desk, but remained standing, one hand resting on its surface. A power positioning, Owen's brain noted, though he wasn't sure if it was deliberate or just how she occupied space. I had someone look into you, she said. Owen kept his face still. Okay. Mercer Building Services, 6 years in operation, 22 employees, 31 commercial contracts. Clean regulatory history, no outstanding litigation. Net revenue last year was, she said a number that was accurate. Consistent with the previous year, modest growth. That's correct? You're behind on your mortgage, Charlotte said. No pivot, no softening, just the statement, flat and direct, as if she were reading from a report. Owen felt his jaw tighten. That's not information that should be. It's a matter of public record once the foreclosure notice files, she said, which it has, as of 2 days ago. He hadn't known that. He sat with it for a second. I'm aware of my financial situation, he said. What I'm not aware of is what it has to do with a business proposition from you. Charlotte looked at him for a moment. Whatever she was evaluating, she appeared to reach a conclusion. She sat down. I have a merger at risk, she said. You may have seen the Statler piece. I don't follow financial journalism. There are allegations, unfounded, about the structure of a significant acquisition. Harrison Cade, the man whose decision this ultimately comes down to, is 73 years old and has certain, she chose her next word carefully, priorities. He values integrity. He values authenticity. He values specifically what he calls the kind of person he does business with. The faintest note of something, not contempt, but close, entered her voice. He's mentioned in 2 separate conversations that he has concerns about whether I've built something real or something constructed. Owen listened. He's also mentioned twice that he's a family man, that he respects family people, that he... A pause. He has said, directly, that he worries about doing business with people who have no anchor. His words. "And you don't have one," Owen said. Charlotte didn't flinch. "I don't have one." The silence stretched. "So what exactly are you proposing?" Owen asked, though he'd already started to understand. Charlotte opened a drawer and slid a document across the desk. 12 pages, Owen could see, with numbered sections and signature lines at the back. "A contractual marriage," she said. 2 years. Public-facing. Appearances at relevant events. A credible shared life story. Basic interaction when observed. In exchange, she said a number. $5 million. The number sat in the air between them. Owen looked at it. He looked at the document. He looked at Charlotte Ashford, who was watching him with the particular stillness of someone who had decided they were going to get what they wanted and was waiting for the mechanics to catch up. He thought about the foreclosure notice. He thought about 2214 Weston Avenue and Gerald the oak tree and Lily's crayon drawing, and Datey is the best. He thought about the math he'd been doing for months, the same dead-end numbers. "No," he said. Charlotte blinked, slightly, barely, but it was the most human thing he'd seen from her yet. "You haven't—" "I heard you," Owen said. "I'm not saying no to the money. I understand what you need, and I understand what you're offering, and I'm not going to pretend the number isn't significant, because it is. What I'm saying is that I can't answer you today. Then when—" "I have a daughter," he said. "She's 8. And whatever you may have found in your research, the thing you didn't find is that I don't make decisions that affect her life without letting her be part of them. Not because I think she should be making the decision. She's 8. She shouldn't be, but because she's been through enough that she deserves to not have things happen around her without her knowing." Charlotte stared at him. The expression on her face was one Owen would think about later, not quite disbelief, not quite respect, but something in between, something that looked like encountering a variable she hadn't entered into her equations. "You want your daughter to meet me first," she said. "Yes." "Before you'll consider a $5 million offer." "Yes." Charlotte was quiet for a moment, then, "That's the most unusual condition I've ever been given." "I imagine," Owen said, "that most of the conditions you've been given have been about money." Another silence. Longer this time. "Fine," Charlotte said. Owen stood up. "I'll call Marcus to arrange it." He looked at the document still lying on the desk between them, 12 pages, unanswered. "Don't draw up anything final yet." He left without taking it. He picked Lily up from school that afternoon and didn't say anything about any of it. They went home. He made spaghetti. She told him about a history project she was doing on the Chicago fire of 1871 and whether it was really a cow that started it or whether that was just something people said. "It's probably something people just say," Owen told her. "That's what I thought. I'm going to argue in my project that the cow story is an example of how history chooses simple explanations over complicated ones." "That's a good argument," Owen said. "Do you think Ms. Harmon will give me a good grade?" "I think Ms. Harmon will either give you a very good grade or be slightly annoyed. Those are your 2 most likely outcomes." Lily considered this while twirling spaghetti. "I think that's okay," she said finally. "Being a little annoying to people is sometimes worth it if you're right." Owen looked at his daughter across the table. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think you're right about that." Later, when she was in bed, he sat in the kitchen with the cold coffee he'd forgotten to drink during dinner and thought about Charlotte Ashford's office, the clean desk, the aerial photograph, the document with the signature lines. He thought about a woman who had a 47-story building named after herself and apparently nothing else. He thought about Lily, who was going to see through everything. She always did. And whatever she saw, it was going to tell him something he couldn't find on his own. 3 weeks. He had 3 weeks. He called Marcus the next morning and arranged dinner for Saturday. Saturday arrived the way important days often do, looking exactly like any other day. It was overcast, 54 degrees, with a wind off the lake that made it feel colder. Lily wore her yellow bee shirt again because she'd already decided it was her favorite, and she saw no reason to complicate that. "Where are we going again?" she asked, from the back seat. "To meet someone," Owen said. "Someone who might become important?" Owen glanced at her in the rear-view mirror. "Why do you ask it like that?" "You've been quiet all week," Lily said. "Not sad quiet. Thinking quiet. You only do thinking quiet when something might change." She looked out the window. "I'm not scared of things changing, Dad. I just like to know." Owen was quiet for a moment. "Someone might become important," he said. "I don't know yet." Lily nodded, satisfied with the honesty, and went back to looking out the window. Charlotte Ashford's penthouse occupied the entire 52nd floor of a residential tower 2 blocks from the lake. The doorman was expecting them. The elevator, this one working perfectly, opened directly into the apartment. The first thing Owen noticed was the light. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides. The city laid out below like a circuit board. The lake, a dark gray stripe at the horizon. The second thing he noticed was the toys. There were a lot of toys. A set of enormous stuffed animals arranged along one wall. Bears, a giraffe, something that was either a very large rabbit or a very small horse. A dollhouse that appeared to be modeled on an actual architectural style. Art supplies in branded packaging, still sealed. A remote-controlled car. Board games he could see had never been opened. A telescope. He looked at them. He looked at Charlotte, who was standing across the room in a silk blouse and tailored trousers that probably cost more than Owen's monthly mortgage payment, or what his monthly mortgage payment used to be, with an expression of careful, prepared confidence. He thought, "Oh, she has no idea." Lily stepped forward from behind his knee. She looked at the toys. She looked at Charlotte. "Hi," said Lily. "Hello," said Charlotte. And then, with the slight over-deliberateness of someone who'd practiced this, "I heard you're 8 years old." "Yeah." "I thought you might like—" Charlotte gestured at the array. Lily looked at the toys for a moment. Then she looked up at Charlotte. "Did you buy all of these today?" Charlotte blinked. Yes, they were arranged this week." "For me specifically?" "Yes." Lily nodded slowly, not unkindly, but with an attention that made Charlotte shift slightly, almost imperceptibly, on her feet. "Thank you," Lily said politely. "That was nice of you." She walked past the toys to the window. Charlotte watched her go. Something moved through her expression that Owen couldn't quite name. Not offense, not embarrassment. Something quieter. Something more like the beginning of understanding that she'd made a calculation and it hadn't landed the way she'd planned. "She doesn't want them," Charlotte said, low, to Owen. "She wants to see the lake," Owen said. "She always looks for water first." Charlotte looked at her apartment as if seeing it suddenly from a different angle. "Dinner's ready," she said, recovering. "If you'd like to—" "Yeah," said Owen. "Let's eat." The dining room table was set for 3, and the dinner was extraordinary, catered clearly from somewhere serious. There was a salmon dish with a reduction Owen couldn't identify, and bread that was obviously fresh-baked, and a salad with components he'd never seen arranged together. 3 different kinds of sparkling water. Dessert visible on the sideboard, 2 different options. Lily sat across from Charlotte and picked up her fork with the serious concentration she brought to most things. "Do you like salmon?" Charlotte asked. "I like it okay," Lily said. "My dad makes it better." Owen felt Charlotte glance at him. "Dad makes it with butter and lemon," Lily continued, completely without guile. "And sometimes he burns one side a little bit. But that part's the best part." "The burned part?" Charlotte asked. "It's crispier, and it means he made it himself." Lily ate a piece. "This is good, though. It's just different." Charlotte sat with that for a moment. "Different how?" Lily considered. "This tastes like someone was trying really hard to make something perfect. My dad's tastes like he was just making dinner." The silence after that was brief but full. "Your father mentioned you're doing a school project," Charlotte said, pivoting. "About the Great Chicago Fire," Lily said. Did you know that the cow story is probably not true? I didn't know that. A lot of history is like that. The easy story gets famous, and the complicated truth gets forgotten. Lily looked at Charlotte. Do you know a lot about history? Some, Charlotte said. What do you know about? Business, finance, international markets? Lily nodded thoughtfully. Is that what you studied in school? Economics. And then an MBA. Did you always know that's what you wanted to do? Charlotte paused. The question, simple, guileless, the kind only children ask, seemed to catch her somewhere she hadn't expected. I think I always knew I was good at it, she said carefully. Whether I wanted it specifically, another pause. That's a different question. Lily looked at her. Was it your mom and dad's business? No, I started it myself. Oh. Lily ate another bite. Do they live far away? Your mom and dad? My mother passed away when I was 12, Charlotte said. My father lives in Connecticut. We don't see each other often. Oh, Lily said again, softer. I'm sorry about your mom. Charlotte looked at her. Thank you. A pause. The table was very quiet. My mom died too, Lily said, when I was 5. I don't remember her as well as I used to. Charlotte didn't say anything for a moment. Owen watched her try to find the right response and come up short, in the way most people did when an 8-year-old delivered truth that plainly. I'm sorry, Charlotte said. It came out slightly rough. I'm sorry. It's okay, Lily said. Dad still loves her really much, even now. You can tell because he keeps her picture on his desk and he doesn't move it even when stuff gets messy. Owen stared at his plate. Charlotte started. He's a good dad, Lily said simply. He's tired a lot, but he's really good. She looked at Charlotte with that clear, straight-on gaze. Are you going to marry him? Charlotte opened her mouth, closed it. Owen said, Lily, I'm not upset, Lily said quickly, looking at Owen. I just want to know what we're actually talking about, Dad. Because there are a lot of toys and really fancy food, and I don't think this is just a regular dinner. Owen looked at his daughter. He looked at Charlotte. He breathed in. It's complicated, he said. And I need you to trust me that I'll explain all of it to you. But the short version is that Charlotte needs some help, and she asked us to come so she could meet you. Lily turned back to Charlotte. She studied her for a moment, that particular 8-year-old study that is more penetrating than most adults can manage because it hasn't yet learned to be polite about what it observes. Are you lonely? Lily asked. Charlotte went very still. It's okay if you are, Lily said. Lots of people are. My dad was really lonely the first year after Mom died, even though he never said it. I could just tell. Charlotte looked at this child, this 8-year-old with salmon on her fork and a gap in her front teeth, and her mother's curly hair, who had walked past $2,000 worth of toys to look at the lake. Something happened in Charlotte's face, something small and irreversible. Yes, Charlotte said, very quietly. I think I might be. Lily nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. She went back to eating. The dinner continued. Outside the windows, Chicago spread out to every horizon, and the lake sat dark and patient in the distance, and 3 people ate salmon in a room full of unopened toys, and something shifted that none of them had quite planned for. Later, much later, after Owen had gathered their coats and said formal thank yous, and helped Lily into the elevator, after the door had closed and Charlotte stood alone in her enormous, perfectly lit apartment, she walked slowly to the window Lily had stood at first. She looked at the lake. She stood there for a long time. On the sideboard, the untouched dessert sat under its dome. Around her, the stuffed animals stood in their arranged row, still perfect, still sealed in their packaging expectations. She put her hand against the cold glass. Somewhere in the city below, a man she'd met twice was driving home with his daughter, who had asked her the most honest question anyone had asked her in years, possibly ever. Charlotte stood at the window and looked at the lake and felt, for the first time in a very long time, the specific weight of everything she had built and everything she had not. It was heavy. She hadn't fully known that until now. The drive home from Charlotte's penthouse took 22 minutes, and Lily spent most of it looking out the window without speaking, which was unusual. Lily was not by nature a quiet child. She processed the world through language, questions, observations, arguments with herself that she narrated aloud as if Owen were a useful sounding board rather than her father. The silence meant she was thinking about something specific, turning it over, examining it from different angles before she was ready to say it out loud. Owen waited. They were 4 blocks from home when she said, "She bought all those toys in like one day, didn't she?" "Probably," Owen said. "Because she wanted me to like her?" "That's my guess." Lily was quiet another moment. "That's not how it works, though." "No," Owen agreed. "You can't just buy someone's—" She searched for the word. "Their yes? Their approval, whatever." "You can't," Owen said. "She doesn't know that?" Lily asked, and her tone wasn't unkind. It was genuinely curious. The question of a child who has encountered an adult gap she can't quite explain. "I think she knows a lot of things very well," Owen said carefully. "And some things not at all." Lily looked at his profile in the dark of the car. "Are you going to tell me what's really going on?" Owen pulled into their street, drove past 3 familiar houses, the Garcias with the broken porch light, the Nakamuras with the minivan that never quite fit in the driveway, and pulled up in front of 2214. He sat for a moment with the engine off. "Yeah," he said, "I'm going to tell you." He told her most of it. Not every number, not every legal detail, but the shape of it. That they owed money on the house. That they might lose it if something didn't change. That Charlotte had come to him with a proposal because she needed something too, and that he'd told her he couldn't answer without meeting her first. Lily listened the way she always listened, completely still, eyes on him, processing. When he finished, she said, "Are we going to lose the house?" "I don't know yet," he said. "I'm trying to make sure we don't." "Is that what Charlotte is? Part of trying?" "Maybe." Lily looked at the house, at the oak tree in the front yard. Gerald, enormous and patient, dropping the last of his fall leaves on the lawn. At the porch light, Owen had fixed himself 3 summers ago with a YouTube tutorial and a lot of cursing he'd thought Lily was asleep for. She was not. "I don't want to lose it," she said, very quietly. "Mom picked it." "I know. But—" She stopped, tried again. "I don't think you should do something just because of the house, Dad. If it's wrong." Owen looked at his daughter in the dark car. "When did you get so clear-headed?" he asked. "I was always clear-headed," Lily said with a dignity that was entirely her own. "You just don't always ask." He got out. She got out. They went inside, and he made her a cup of chamomile tea she didn't finish and tucked her in at 9:15, and she was asleep before he made it back down the hallway. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time, not doing anything in particular. He had 19 days. Charlotte, meanwhile, was having what she later described to no one, because she described things to no one as a difficult weekend. It was not a word she used frequently. Difficult. She preferred precise language, and difficult was imprecise. The problem was that what she was experiencing resisted precision. Something had gotten under her guard on Saturday evening, and she hadn't fully identified it yet, and that uncertainty was agitating in a way she couldn't efficiently manage. She worked through Sunday. That was standard. She worked most Sundays. But the quality of her focus was off, interrupted by impressions that kept surfacing without invitation. Lily, at the window, looking for water. Lily's voice saying, "I think I might be," with a matter-of-factness that somehow made the word lonelier, not less. The unopened board games along the wall that she'd had Marcus source on Thursday, and that now, in retrospect, she understood had been exactly the wrong gesture, or rather the right gesture made for the wrong reasons. She'd been treating it as a negotiation. Win the child, secure the agreement, proceed with the contract. Lily had walked into the room and immediately refused to be negotiated with. Not aggressively, not even consciously. She'd simply been herself, which was, Charlotte was realizing, a much harder thing to deal with than opposition. By Sunday evening, Charlotte had reviewed the Vantage merger documents twice, answered 23 emails, and made a decision that surprised her. She called no one about the dinner. Not her attorney, not Marcus, not Richard Ewan at Vantage. She didn't process it professionally or translate it into action items. She just let it sit. This was not characteristic behavior. She noticed this about herself. Filed it somewhere. On Monday morning, Marcus appeared in her doorway at 7:45 with coffee she hadn't asked for and an expression that meant he'd been thinking about something. "How did Saturday go?" he asked. "Fine." "Fine good or fine nothing went wrong but nothing went right?" Charlotte looked at him over her laptop. Marcus had been her assistant for 4 years. He was 34, methodical, and had the unusual quality of being able to read her accurately about 60% of the time without her having told him anything. It was occasionally useful and occasionally irritating. "The child is perceptive," Charlotte said. "How perceptive?" "Enough to ask me within 40 minutes of meeting me whether I was lonely." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "What did you say?" "The truth." Charlotte looked back at her screen. "Apparently." Marcus set the coffee on the edge of her desk and didn't say anything else, which was, Charlotte thought, one of his better qualities. Owen called on Monday afternoon. "She wants to meet again," he said without preamble. "Lily does. She said—" He paused, and Charlotte could hear something in the pause that might have been amusement or resignation, or both. "She said she has more questions." Charlotte sat back in her chair. "What kind of questions?" "She didn't tell me. She said she'd ask them herself." A beat. "She's 8. "She is," Owen agreed, with the tone of a man who'd been surprised by this fact many times himself. Charlotte thought about Lily at the window, about "Are you lonely?" delivered with the same tone another child might use to ask what time dinner was. "Tell her she can ask them," Charlotte said. "I'll let her know." Another pause. "There's something else." "What?" "I need more time before I give you an answer about the contract. I understand you have time pressure with Vantage, and I'm not trying to complicate that. I just—" He seemed to choose his words with some care. "I don't do things fast when they involve Lily. That's not going to change." Charlotte considered this. The merger timeline was breathing down her neck. Harrison Cade was flying in for a formal dinner in 3 weeks. She'd confirmed that this morning, which meant 3 weeks was now her functional deadline for having something that looked like a real relationship, not a hastily arranged one. 2 weeks, she said. "I can work with 2 weeks." "That should be enough," Owen said. "Fine." She paused. "When is she available?" "Wednesday evening, after school." "I'll be home by 6. There was a brief silence, not uncomfortable exactly, but aware. 2 people on opposite sides of a proposition that neither of them had anticipated being this complicated. "All right," Owen said. "Wednesday." He hung up. Charlotte set down the phone and looked at her window for a moment. She called Marcus. "Don't arrange anything this time," she said when he picked up. "No gifts, no catering, whatever's in the kitchen." A pause. "There's not much in the kitchen." "Then get groceries, normal groceries." She thought, "Do you know what an 8-year-old eats?" "I have a niece," Marcus said. "She's 9, but get what she eats." "Got it." Charlotte hung up, then called back 30 seconds later. "Nothing expensive," she said, "or branded, just regular food." "Regular food," Marcus confirmed, very carefully neutral. "Thank you." She hung up again, looked at the merger file on her desk, picked it up, put it back down, picked up a different file. Wednesday came, and Lily came with it, carrying her history project in a folder under her arm. She'd been adding sources all week, Owen had been informed, and the cow had been definitively exonerated in Lily's estimation, and she intended to make this case compellingly. Charlotte's penthouse looked different this time. The enormous stuffed animals were gone, or relocated, Owen couldn't tell. The atmosphere was less staged. There was something on the stove which was notable because the kitchen on Saturday had looked like it had been professionally installed and never used. It still looked expensive, but it smelled like garlic and tomatoes. Lily looked around when they came in. "The toys are gone," she said. "I moved them," Charlotte said from the kitchen doorway. She was wearing a dark green sweater that was slightly less formal than Saturday's blouse, and her hair was down rather than pulled back, which on a person with Charlotte's kind of controlled gravity bearing counted as a significant departure. "Did you return them?" Lily asked. "Some. Some are going to a children's hospital." Lily considered this. "That's good," she said, with genuine approval, and then she walked to the kitchen and stood in the doorway looking at the stove. What are you making? Pasta. It's the most reliable thing I know how to cook, which is a short list. I know how to make scrambled eggs, Lily said, and toast, and cereal, obviously. Cereal doesn't count, Owen said from behind her. It counts, Lily said firmly. Then, to Charlotte, do you want help? Charlotte looked at this child who had just offered to help her cook in her own kitchen. Sure, Charlotte said. Owen sat at the kitchen counter and watched his 8-year-old daughter stand on a step stool beside Charlotte Ashford, the same Charlotte Ashford who was currently managing a $4.3 billion merger negotiation, and stir pasta sauce with a wooden spoon while explaining, unprompted, her theory of historical narrative simplification and how it applied to the Chicago fire. People want a villain, Lily said, stirring, or a cause that's simple. Mrs. O'Leary's cow is simple. The city burned down because of complicated factors involving urban density, building materials, and an extended drought is not simple. That's true of a lot of things, Charlotte said, checking the pasta. Of business too, probably. Charlotte glanced at her. Why do you say that? Because that article said you did something wrong, but you have a lot of lawyers and business people saying you didn't, which means either you're lying or the truth is complicated. Lily looked up at her. Are you lying? No, Charlotte said. Is the truth complicated? Yes. Lily nodded, satisfied. That's what I thought. Owen looked at his pasta sauce-covered daughter and felt something complicated move through him. Pride, partly. Grief, distantly. Because Elena would have loved this. Would have loved watching Lily interrogate a billionaire over a pot of pasta with complete unself-consciousness. But something else, too. Something he wasn't fully ready to look at directly. They ate at the kitchen counter rather than the formal dining room. Charlotte didn't suggest the dining room, and Owen didn't ask, and Lily had already claimed a stool, so that settled it. The pasta was decent, not elegant, not the caliber of Saturday's catered dinner, but real, made with actual effort that you could taste in the slight unevenness of it. It's good, Lily said. It's a little over-salted, Charlotte said. It's fine, Owen said. It's really fine. I know it's over-salted. Lily looked between them. Is it weird that this is only our second time meeting and you guys already argue like people who know each other? Silence. We weren't arguing, Owen said. You were a little bit, Lily said. It's okay. My mom and dad argued about cooking all the time. Mom said Dad underseasoned everything, and Dad said Mom put cheese on things that didn't need cheese. Charlotte turned to look at Owen. Did she? Charlotte asked. She absolutely did, Owen said. Cheese on scrambled eggs, cheese in soup. Once she put cheese on rice, which I maintain was... Rice is a canvas, Lily said, with the confidence of someone quoting a respected source. Mom said that. Your mother, Owen said, had strong and occasionally wrong opinions. Lily grinned. The gap in her front teeth made it asymmetrical and entirely her own. It was Owen had always thought the most Lily thing about her. Charlotte watched the two of them. The ease of it. The way they moved in and out of a memory of someone who wasn't there. Not painfully, not with the careful tiptoe of people trying not to hurt each other, but naturally, like Elena was simply in the next room rather than gone. Like her presence was so established in the fabric of what they were that death hadn't actually removed her, just changed the form of her. Charlotte had no equivalent of that. Her mother had been gone for 18 years and Charlotte had no easy way to bring her into a room. She'd learned, somewhere in the business of becoming what she'd become, to keep the absence filed away where it didn't interrupt the operational present. She ate pasta. She listened. She did not, for once, try to control the direction of the conversation. Lily finished her plate and propped her chin on her hand. Can I ask you my questions now? Those weren't the questions, Charlotte said. Those were preliminary, Lily said. Owen made a small sound that might have been a laugh, suppressed. Go ahead, Charlotte said. Lily looked at her directly, that full-on child's gaze that didn't know how to be indirect. Why do you want to get married to get a business deal? Can't you just explain to the business person that the story isn't true? It's not that simple. Why not? Charlotte paused. Because Harrison Cade, the man who has to approve the merger, has already made certain judgments about me based on things he's read and been told. Facts don't always undo judgments. Sometimes you need to show someone something different, not just tell them. Lily thought about this. That's kind of sad. It's reality. Still sad, though. She rearranged her fork on her plate. Do you actually like my dad? Owen said, Lily. It's a fair question, Lily said calmly. She wants to marry you. That's a big thing. Even fake. Charlotte looked at Owen for a brief moment, then back at Lily. I don't know your father well enough to have a strong opinion about him. But so far? Charlotte was quiet for a second in a way that felt considered rather than evasive. He's direct. He doesn't try to manage me, which is unusual. And he came to a meeting about a $5 million proposal, and his first condition was that I meet his daughter. She paused. I respect that. Respect is good, Lily said, but it's not the same as like. No, Charlotte agreed. It's not. Lily nodded. Okay, next question. She looked at Charlotte with those careful eyes. When my dad loves someone, he does it for the whole rest of his life, even after. He loved my mom every day she was sick, and he still loves her now even though she's been gone 3 years. He's not. She searched for the right word and didn't quite find it, settled for, he's not the kind of person you can borrow and put back. Charlotte went very still. I know, Charlotte said. Do you? Lily asked. Not challenging, just checking. I think I do, Charlotte said quietly, but I think you're right to make sure. Lily looked at her for a long moment. Something passed across that 8-year-old face that Owen had seen before. The look of a child measuring an adult not against what the adult was saying, but against something underneath it. Something beneath the surface that words can't fully control. I don't think you're a bad person, Lily said finally. I just think you've been alone for a long time, and you forgot that you're not supposed to treat people the same way you treat businesses. The kitchen was very quiet. Owen looked at Charlotte. Charlotte was looking at Lily, and whatever she was feeling was right there on her face for once. Not hidden, not filed away, just there. The expression of someone who has been told a true thing about themselves by someone too young to mean it cruelly. That's probably accurate, Charlotte said. Her voice was steady, but something about it was different. Thinner, somehow. Closer to whatever was under the surface. Lily seemed to accept this. She slid off her stool. Can I see the telescope from last time? I noticed it before you moved stuff. It's in the study, Charlotte said. I'll show you. The study was smaller than the other rooms, more personal, if personal was even a word that applied to Charlotte's spaces. There were books on actual shelves, which was the first sign in the apartment that Charlotte might have an interior life beyond spreadsheets. Owen scanned them without trying to appear to. Economics and business, yes, but also history, some fiction, a worn copy of something by Joan Didion that had clearly been read more than once. The telescope stood by the north window, a serious piece of equipment, not decorative. Lily approached it with reverence. Do you actually use it? She asked. Sometimes, Charlotte said. Late at night, when I can't sleep. What do you look at? The moon, mostly. Sometimes I can find a planet. Jupiter is usually easy if you know roughly where to look. Lily put her eye to the eyepiece, adjusted something slightly by instinct. My mom used to say the stars were the universe's way of reminding you that your problems were small. Owen, standing in the doorway, felt the familiar small pain of Lily quoting Elena. Charlotte said, That's a comforting way to think about it. I don't know if it's actually true, Lily said, still looking through the telescope. My problems feel big to me even when I know the stars are big too. I don't think it works like they say. She adjusted again. But it's still nice to look. Charlotte looked at the child at her telescope. In her study. In the apartment she'd had for 6 years, and in which she'd been alone more or less, every night she hadn't been working, which was most nights. It is, Charlotte said. Lily pulled back from the eyepiece. Will you show me Jupiter sometime, when it's out? Charlotte blinked. The question was so simple, so absent of agenda. Yes, Charlotte said. I can do that. Lily nodded, satisfied. Okay. She looked at the books. Have you read all of these? Most of them. Do you read for fun or because you have to? Both. Mostly fun, actually. Lily looked slightly surprised. I didn't think you did many things just for fun. I didn't always, Charlotte said. I'm not sure I do now, honestly, but I used to. What happened? Charlotte considered. Work happened, and then more work, and I kept thinking there'd be a point where I'd done enough of it that I could stop and just... She stopped. Be? Lily offered. Charlotte looked at her. Be, she agreed, but the point kept moving. Lily thought about this for a moment, then... My dad says that's a trap a lot of grown-ups fall into. He says you have to decide to be happy. You can't wait until everything's perfect to start. Your dad sounds like he's thought about it a lot. He used to be kind of the other way, Lily said. Before Mom died, he worried about money and work too. Then after... She shrugged, a small 8-year-old shrug. I think losing her made him figure out what was actually important. That sounds bad, but I don't mean it bad. It doesn't sound bad, Charlotte said. He's still sad sometimes, but he's... Lily looked for the word again. He's here. Like, when he's with me, he's really with me. Not somewhere else in his head. She glanced at Charlotte. Are you ever really somewhere? In person? Or is your head always at work? Charlotte stood in her own study, among her own books, in front of her own telescope that she'd bought 3 years ago in a moment of impulse she'd never fully examined, and she was being asked whether she was actually present in her own life by a child who'd lost more than Charlotte had and seemed to be doing a better job of living in spite of it. I'm not sure, Charlotte said honestly. I'm trying to be here right now. Lily studied her. You're doing okay at it, she said, with the measured generosity of a fair judge. But Owen got Lily home at 8:30, which was late for a school night, and normally he wouldn't have, but the evening had had its own momentum. He got her into pajamas and through the abbreviated version of her bedtime routine, brush teeth, wash face, 1 chapter of Phantom Tollbooth, and when she was horizontal and her eyes were getting heavy, she said without opening them fully, She's lonely, Dad. Like really lonely. Not just alone. Lonely. I know, Owen said. The kind that happens when you're busy all the time, and then one day you stop and realize you forgot to be anyone's person. Owen sat on the edge of her bed. Where'd you get that? Don't know. Lily's eyes were closed now. I just felt it. He sat there a moment after her breathing evened out. Gerald's branches moved against the window in the outside wind. The house made its familiar small sounds, the creak of the second porch step that he'd been meaning to fix for months, the refrigerator's hum through the kitchen wall. He thought about Charlotte standing in her study saying, I'm trying to be here right now. He thought about the way she'd answered Lily's questions, not deflecting, not performing, which was what he'd expected, but actually answering, imperfectly, with pauses that meant she was thinking rather than retrieving a prepared response. He'd looked up Charlotte Ashford after the first meeting, of course. The articles painted a consistent picture, relentlessly effective, somewhat feared, not particularly well-liked but broadly respected. 3 Forbes profiles, 2 business school case studies. A quote from an unnamed rival executive, she doesn't have a blind spot, she's all peripheral vision, nothing gets past her. That was clearly meant as a complaint, but read, depending on your angle, as a compliment. The woman who'd stood in her study admitting she'd forgotten to be somewhere didn't quite match those articles. Or rather, she matched them and also didn't, the way a person rarely matches entirely what's been written about them. Owen went downstairs, sat at the kitchen table again. This was becoming a habit. He thought about $5 million. He thought about 19 days becoming 17, then 15. He thought about the house. He thought about Elena's voice saying imperfect, and so are we. He thought about Lily's voice saying he's not the kind of person you can borrow and put back. He opened his laptop, looked at the mortgage company's website, looked at the balance, looked at the timeline, closed the laptop, picked up his phone to set it down, picked it up again. He texted Charlotte. Not a call. A text, which felt less like a negotiation and more like 2 people actually talking. Lily says you're doing okay at being here. Coming from her, that's a real review. He stared at it, sent it, immediately second-guessed it, left the kitchen before he could see the response. He was at the top of the stairs when his phone buzzed. He went back down and looked at it. Tell her I'll practice. 3 words. No punctuation. Charlotte Ashford, who ran a 47-floor company and could construct a financial argument with the precision of a surgeon, had sent 3 words and no punctuation. And Owen stood in his kitchen and felt the wall he'd been keeping in good repair develop a hairline crack. He put the phone down, went to bed. Whoa. The next 10 days had a rhythm to them that none of the 3 of them would have predicted. Lily, having decided that Charlotte was a project worth her attention, began texting her. Charlotte had given Owen her number for logistics, and apparently Lily had, with Owen's knowledge and mild bewilderment, saved it under Charlotte the Billionaire. She texted primarily during the after-school hour when Owen was still driving home from sites and Lily was doing homework. I found out Mrs. O'Leary's real name was Catherine. Did you know that? Charlotte, who had been in the middle of a conference call about offshore tax structures when this arrived, stepped away from her desk to respond. I didn't. Catherine O'Leary? Catherine McLaughlin O'Leary. She was an immigrant. I'm going to put that in my project because I think it matters that they blamed an immigrant's cow. That does matter. Good research, thanks. What are you doing? Conference call. Is it boring? Charlotte looked at the door of her office, behind which Marcus and 2 attorneys were waiting for her to return. Extremely. Maybe you should get a cow to blame things on. Charlotte read this, then read it again. Something completely involuntary crossed her face. She wasn't entirely sure what to call it. I'll look into that, she typed back. She went back to the conference call. For the first time in recent memory, she was slightly distracted by something that had nothing to do with work, and the strange thing was, she didn't immediately try to correct it. Owen came by the Ashford Tower the following Thursday. Routine maintenance visit, 3rd floor HVAC, nothing Charlotte would have been aware of except that she happened to be in the lobby when he came through, which was a coincidence so unremarkable it barely merited mentioning, except that they both stopped. Hey, Owen said. Owen. She had her phone in her hand and was clearly moving toward the elevator. HVAC? 3rd floor? Right. She looked at him for a second. How long will you be here? 3 hours, maybe, depending on the unit. I'll tell the cafeteria to put you on the account. They do decent sandwiches. You don't need to be... It's a building expense, Charlotte said, with the mild impatience of someone who has found a practical solution and doesn't understand the resistance to it. You're doing work in the building. Owen looked at her. Thank you. She nodded, moved toward the elevator, stopped at the last second. Lily texted me about her project, she said, not turning around. She said her teacher gave her a preliminary grade of outstanding. She told me, Owen said. Charlotte turned slightly, not all the way. She worked hard on it. She always works hard, Owen said. She's her mother's daughter that way. Charlotte looked at him then, fully, the way she sometimes did when something landed somewhere she hadn't prepared for. Then she nodded once and got in the elevator. Owen stood in the lobby for a moment. He went to fix the 3rd floor HVAC. He ate a cafeteria sandwich that was, as promised, decent. He filed the service report, noted 3 items for follow-up, and submitted it to Dave Kowalski's office. On the way out, he passed the lobby again. Charlotte wasn't there. He had 9 days left. The dinner that changed everything happened on a Friday. Owen had initiated it, not to discuss the contract, but because Lily had asked to see Charlotte again, and he'd decided somewhere in the past week that he needed to understand what was happening here before he made any irreversible decision. Not about the money, about the person. The 3 of them ate at Charlotte's again, pasta, because it had worked the first time, because Charlotte apparently found it reassuring to repeat things that had worked. Lily had brought her completed history project to show Charlotte, which Charlotte read with a focus and seriousness that surprised Owen, not performing interest, actually reading, asking a follow-up question about Catherine O'Leary's later life that sent Lily into a 15-minute research spiral on Charlotte's phone. They moved to the living room after. Lily curled up in a corner of Charlotte's couch with a blanket she'd apparently claimed as hers over the past 2 visits, and Charlotte sat in the armchair adjacent, and Owen sat across from them both. And there was a moment where the 3 of them just occupied the same quiet space without anyone trying to be anything. Then Lily looked up from Charlotte's phone. "Dad?" she said. Can I say something?" "Sure." Lily looked at Charlotte, then back at Owen. "I think you should do it," she said. Owen went still. "Do what, Bug?" "The contract thing." She set the phone down. "I've been thinking about it all week, and I think you should." Charlotte across the room was very carefully looking at the middle distance. "Lily," Owen said. "I know it's weird," she said, "but you need the money and Charlotte needs the help and—" She paused. "And I think she's actually a decent person who got confused about how things work. People don't make sense until you understand them. She makes sense to me now." The room was very quiet. "You're 8, Owen said gently. "I know how old I am, Dad. This isn't something you need to—" "I'm not deciding it," Lily said. "You decide it. I'm just saying I'm not scared of it." She looked at Charlotte again. "Are you actually going to try? Or is it just going to be a business thing?" Charlotte looked at this child who had walked into her apartment 2 weeks ago and declined to be won over by toys and had instead asked whether she was lonely and offered to stir her pasta sauce and claimed her couch blanket as a territory and texted her about Catherine O'Leary and apparently, in the intervening time, made some private decision about her that Charlotte had no framework for understanding. "I'm going to try," Charlotte said. "Good," Lily said. "Because here's the thing." She sat up a little straighter. "My dad still loves my mom. Like, still. And that's not going to change and it's not a problem. It's just true. And whoever's in his life has to be okay with that. Because she was here first and she loved us when things were hard. And she deserves to still be, to still exist, in how we talk and what we remember." She looked at Charlotte with clear, careful eyes. "Can you do that?" Charlotte looked back. Something was happening in her face. Not the careful neutral she usually maintained, not the controlled boardroom stillness. Something was coming apart, very quietly, at the edges. "I think," Charlotte said slowly, "that she sounds like someone worth remembering." Lily held her gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded. Once. The way she nodded when she determined something to be true. She curled back into her blanket and picked up the phone again. Owen sat across the room and did not trust himself to speak for a moment. He looked at Charlotte. Charlotte was looking at Lily with an expression Owen had not seen on her face before. Not the evaluation, not the controlled assessment. Something more like the expression of a person standing in front of something they can't quite categorize and aren't sure how to file. Something that, if he'd had to name it, looked like it might be the very beginning of wonder. Outside the window, Chicago glittered in the Friday dark. The lake sat where it always sat, patient and enormous, and below the 47th floor a whole city of ordinary lives moved through its ordinary Friday. And up here, 3 people sat in a room and none of them quite knew what had just been decided, but something had. Owen looked at the contract sitting unsigned on Charlotte's sideboard, where it had been sitting since their first meeting. He looked at his daughter, who had already moved on to researching something else entirely on Charlotte's phone, with the focused calm of a person who has said what she needed to say and considers the matter handled. He looked at Charlotte, who was still looking at Lily. He said quietly, "I'll sign it." Charlotte turned. "Monday," he said. "I'll come Monday." Charlotte looked at him for a moment. Something moved through her eyes that she didn't try to hide, which was unusual and which Owen noticed. "Monday," she said. Lily did not look up from the phone, but she smiled slightly at whatever she was reading. The gap in her teeth showed. He drove home late that night, Lily asleep in the back seat before they hit the first traffic light. He carried her inside. She was getting too big for this, just barely still light enough that he could manage it, and got her into bed without waking her, and set her shoes by the door, and stood in the hallway outside her room one more time. The house was quiet. Gerald moved against the window. Owen stood in the hallway of the house his wife had picked and thought about the next thing, whatever it was going to be. Not $5 million. Not a merger. Not even a contract. Just the next thing. He went to the kitchen. He did not sit at the table this time. He stood at the window and looked out at the backyard in the dark. Gerald, the fence, the space where Elena had said she wanted to put a garden and never quite gotten to. He was 32 years old and he was tired, and he was trying. That had to be enough. It had to be. He signed it on a Monday, as promised. Marcus had printed a fresh copy. The original had been sitting on Charlotte's sideboard long enough that it felt ceremonial to use a new one. Owen arrived at 10 in the morning, read it in full in Charlotte's office without rushing, asked 2 questions that were specific and legal rather than emotional, and signed where indicated. Charlotte signed across from him. Marcus witnessed. The whole thing took 11 minutes. When it was done, Owen set down the pen and looked at the document for a moment. Charlotte picked it up, reviewed the signatures as if confirming something she already knew, and set it in the folder Marcus was holding. "The first wire transfer will go through by end of business today," she said. "The initial installment, as outlined." "Thank you," Owen said. It was the most transactional thank you either of them had exchanged, and they both heard it, and neither said anything about it. Owen stood up. He'd worn a jacket, not his work jacket, his actual jacket, the gray one Elena had bought him for their 5th anniversary dinner that still fit because he hadn't changed size so much as shape in the years since. He wasn't sure why he'd worn it. He hadn't thought about it consciously. He just put it on that morning without examining the decision, and now it sat on him in Charlotte's office like a small private fact neither of them mentioned. "I have a service call at 1, he said. "Of course." Charlotte walked him to the elevator herself, which Marcus noted silently and correctly interpreted as significant. "I'll have Marcus send you the event schedule for the next 6 weeks. The Vantage dinner is in 13 days. "That's fast." "I know." The elevator arrived. Owen stepped in, turned to face forward. "Charlotte," he said. She looked at him. "We should probably know more about each other before we walk into a room full of people who are looking for cracks." She held his gaze. "I was going to suggest the same thing. Tomorrow," he said. "Not your building, somewhere regular." The doors closed. Charlotte stood at the elevator for a moment, then walked back to her office. Marcus was there, the signed folder in his hands, watching her with the particular expression he used when he thought something was happening that she wasn't fully accounting for. "Get me the Vantage event timeline," she said. "Already have it. And cancel my 6 o'clock tomorrow." Marcus made a note. "What should I put as the reason?" Charlotte sat down. "Personal obligation." She said it without thinking about it. Marcus wrote it down. Neither of them mentioned that it was the first time in 4 years she'd used that particular category. They met at a diner on Wabash the next evening. Owen's suggestion, because he knew it and Charlotte didn't, which meant they were on roughly equivalent footing in at least one respect. It was the kind of place that had been there since the 70s and showed no interest in being discovered by food writers. Good coffee, reliable eggs, a pie display case with 4 varieties that rotated on some principle Owen had never cracked. Charlotte arrived first. Owen found her at a corner booth, slightly out of place in a camel coat that cost more than anything else in the room, looking at the laminated menu with an expression of genuine concentration. He slid into the booth across from her. "Don't let the lamination put you off. The pie is real." "I'm not put off," she said. I'm deciding." "Deciding what?" "Whether to order dinner or just coffee." She set the menu down. "I usually just have coffee in the evenings." "That's not a meal." "I'm aware it's not a meal. It's coffee." "Order dinner," Owen said. The waitress arrived before Charlotte could argue, and he ordered the turkey club and apple pie, and Charlotte looked at the menu one more time and ordered the same thing with the self-consciousness of someone improvising a move they hadn't planned. The coffee came. They sat with it for a moment, adjusting to the strange ordinariness of the situation. 2 people in a diner booth, documents signed, something new and uncharted officially underway. "You grew up in Chicago?" Owen asked. "Evanston, then boarding school in Connecticut at 13, then Yale." "That's a lot of moving." "My father thought stability was overrated," Charlotte said. "He meant it as a compliment to himself." A brief pause. "It wasn't." Owen looked at her. She'd said it flatly without soliciting sympathy, which meant it was simply true rather than performed. "Your mother died when you were 12. 12, yes. And then you went to boarding school at 13. My father wasn't. She stopped, picked up the coffee. He wasn't equipped to raise a child alone. He knew that about himself, at least. Did you know anyone at the school when you arrived? No. She looked out the window at Wabash, at the L tracks overhead, the Tuesday night city moving past. I was fine. I learned to be fine quickly. That's not the same thing as being fine. Charlotte looked back at him. No, she said. It's not. The food arrived, which gave them both a moment to reset. Charlotte looked at the turkey club with the mild uncertainty of someone who'd ordered something impulsively and wasn't sure what they'd committed to. It's not complicated, Owen said. It's a sandwich. I know what a club sandwich is. You're looking at it like it might require instructions. Charlotte picked it up and took a bite, with the deliberate composure of someone who refuses to be teased into being awkward. She chewed, set it down. It's good. I know, your turn. Ask me something. She considered. You started your company with $11,000. That's not a question. How did you get $11,000? Saved it. 3 years working for a bigger facilities management company, lived cheap, saved everything that wasn't rent or groceries. Elena was working too. She was a graphic designer, freelance, so the income was variable. We had a shared spreadsheet, actually. She was more organized about money than I was. Was, Charlotte said, not unkindly. Was, Owen agreed. He ate a piece of the club. She was good at a lot of things. Not always the things she got credit for, but she was good at them. Like what? Owen thought about it. She could tell when someone was lying within about 30 seconds. Not confrontationally. She wouldn't call you on it. She'd just file it away and adjust. She was patient with Lily in a way I had to learn. I'm decent with Lily now, but Elena was... He made a small gesture. Natural. It was like she'd been doing it her whole life. Some people are like that with children, Charlotte said. Are you? She looked at him. No, Lily is easy to talk to, but that's Lily. I don't think that generalizes. She's easy to talk to because she's direct, Owen said. She doesn't play social games. Kids who aren't taught to perform for adults are usually pretty easy. Charlotte ate. Processed this. You didn't teach her to perform. Elena didn't want that. I didn't either. He drank his coffee. We both grew up in houses where you had to manage people's moods, so we made a decision pretty early that Lily wasn't going to have that job. Her job was to be a kid. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Is that why she says whatever she's actually thinking? Usually, yeah. She told me I treat people like businesses. I heard. She wasn't wrong. I know, Owen said. Charlotte looked at him. You're not going to be diplomatic about that. You said she wasn't wrong. I agreed. That's not undiplomaticness. It's just not disagreeing when someone's right. Something in her expression shifted. Not quite a smile. Not exactly, but something in that neighborhood. It was brief, controlled, but it was there. I need to know the story, Charlotte said. The version we tell people. How we met, when, what it looked like. The truth, Owen said. We're close to it. She looked at him. The truth being that I nearly got decapitated by your elevator and hired you for a marriage contract. We met through the building, Owen said. Which is true. And we started spending time together because, he thought, because I fixed something. Which is also true. Charlotte held his gaze. And what did you fix? Owen looked at her. I don't know yet. The diner noise moved around them. Somewhere across the room, someone was having a birthday. The waitstaff appeared with a piece of cake and a candle, and someone laughed loudly and unselfconsciously. Charlotte turned to look, briefly, at the laugh. Owen watched her watch it. Tell me about Vantage, he said. Tell me what you actually need from the dinner. Not the version from the contract, the real version. Charlotte turned back. She was quiet a moment, organizing something. Harrison Cade is old school, she said. He built his company over 40 years, stayed married to the same woman, coached his kids' baseball teams. He believes in what he calls character markers, things that tell you who a person actually is underneath the money. He's told 3 of my attorneys separately that he doesn't do business with people he can't read. And She paused. I'm difficult to read. I know that. You're not difficult to read, Owen said. You're carefully blank. That's different. Charlotte looked at him. How so? Difficult to read means there's nothing visible. I can see you managing what's visible. There's a difference. He ate the last piece of his club. Cade probably sees the management. That's what makes him nervous. Charlotte was very still. You've been in the room with me 6 times. 7. I counted the lobby. She didn't say anything for a moment. That's a lot of observation for 7 encounters. I'm a facility manager. I notice how systems work. He looked at her. You're a system that's putting a lot of energy into appearing not to be one. Charlotte set down her coffee. Most people don't... She stopped, started again. Most people don't see that. Most people aren't looking for it, Owen said. They're too busy being impressed or intimidated. And you're neither. I'm a single father behind on his mortgage, Owen said. Impressed and intimidated are luxuries. Charlotte looked at him across the diner table. The laminated menus, the pie case, the birthday celebration still happening in the corner, the utterly ordinary Tuesday night diner on Wabash where she'd never been before, and didn't fit except that somehow, improbably, it wasn't uncomfortable. Fair enough, she said. She picked up her fork and ate the apple pie. 13 days was not a long time to build something that looked real. What they built instead was something adjacent to real, which turned out to be more durable. They met 5 more times before the Vantage dinner, twice for meals, once when Owen came by to handle a legitimate service issue, and they ended up talking in the lobby for 40 minutes while Marco handled the actual work. Once when Charlotte appeared at Westbrook Elementary's Spring Arts Showcase because Lily had, with characteristic directness, sent her the date and time and said you can come if you want. Charlotte came. She stood in the gymnasium among parents and siblings and grandparents and looked at Lily's painting, a landscape of a backyard with a large oak tree and a figure in the garden that might have been a woman or might have been an approximation of one, and said something quietly to Lily that Owen didn't hear. Lily nodded. Charlotte stayed for the whole showcase. The 5th meeting was not planned by anyone. Owen was walking out of a hardware store on a Saturday afternoon. Lily at a birthday party, 2 hours free. He'd been meaning to get weather stripping for the front door for 4 months. When he saw Charlotte coming out of a bookstore 2 doors down. She had a bag and was looking at her phone, and she almost walked into him. Oh, she said. Hey. They both stood there for a second. The randomness of it was disorienting in a way the planned meetings weren't. Bookstore? Owen said. I finished something. She held up the bag slightly. You? Weather stripping. She looked at the hardware store. Is that urgent? It's been 4 months, so no. I was going to get coffee, she said. Not quite an invitation. Not quite not one. Yeah, Owen said. All right. They found a coffee shop 3 blocks over that was busy enough to be anonymous. Charlotte ordered black coffee. Owen got the same for no reason he could articulate except that it seemed like the appropriate register for the afternoon. What did you buy? Owen asked, nodding at the bag. She took the book out. A novel. Not a business book, not economics. A novel, the kind with a plain cover and no embossing. Any good? I don't know yet. She looked at the cover. Someone recommended it 12 years ago. I kept meaning to get to it. 12 years. I've been busy. What changed? Charlotte set the book on the table. I cleared some things out of my calendar last week. A few recurring obligations I'd been keeping out of habit rather than necessity. She looked at the coffee. It turns out there's more time than I thought. That's both better and worse than it sounds. Owen looked at her. Worse because you have to figure out what to put in it. Yes. What have you been putting in it? Reading, mostly. I walked along the lakefront twice. Lily called me on Tuesday to tell me her project received an A- and to air some grievances about the minus. Owen put his cup down. She what? Apparently she felt the teacher's note about her sources was insufficiently specific, and she wanted to discuss whether consult more academic journals was constructive criticism or lazy feedback. She called you about that. For 22 minutes. Something in Charlotte's voice was different when she talked about Lily, Not softer exactly, but less guarded, less managed. She made a reasonable argument, actually. The note was vague. Owen stared at her. She has my number. Apparently she wanted a second opinion from someone who reads a lot. Charlotte, you run a 47-floor company. I'm aware of that. And you spent 22 minutes discussing an 8-year-old's history project grades. Charlotte looked at him directly. It was a good conversation. A pause. She's going to be formidable when she grows up. She's formidable now, Owen said. She's just small. Charlotte drank her coffee. Something settled in the space between them. Not quite comfort, not yet, but something approaching it. The unremarkable intimacy of two people in a coffee shop on a Saturday, talking about a child, not trying to be anything. She asked me something at the showcase, Charlotte said. What? Whether I missed having a family. She turned the coffee cup slowly. Not pointedly, just she does that, asks things that are pointed and doesn't seem to know they're pointed. She knows, Owen said. She just doesn't think knowing makes it rude. I didn't know what to tell her. What did you say? Charlotte was quiet a moment. I told her I was starting to understand what I'd been missing, which is, she stopped, which is true. I didn't intend for it to come out that true, but it did. Owen looked at his coffee cup. What did she say to that? She said, good, that means you're paying attention. And then she went back to her friends. Owen sat with that. She's been talking about you, Beck, he said. At home, casually, like you're just part of things. She mentioned you to her teacher. She told her friend Maya about the telescope. Charlotte looked at him. There was something in her face he'd been seeing more frequently in the last 2 weeks. The expression of someone encountering something they hadn't accounted for and finding it heavier than they'd estimated. I'm aware I'm temporary, Charlotte said, for her. I want to be clear that I understand the structure of what Charlotte. Owen said her name the way he said Lily's name sometimes. Just the name, nothing attached. It stopped her. I'm not warning you about anything. I'm just telling you what's happening. She looked at him. Okay, she said. The coffee shop moved around them. Someone's kid was drawing on the condensation of a window by the door. Owen watched it and didn't say anything, and neither did Charlotte, and the Saturday afternoon went on. The night before the Vantage dinner, Charlotte couldn't sleep. This was not unusual. She had a lengthy history of insomnia that she'd managed over the years with varying degrees of success. Exercise at 6 in the morning, screens off by 10, which she never actually managed, a white noise machine she'd had since her 20s and couldn't sleep without. None of it reliably worked. She was awake at 2 in the morning in her dark apartment with the city below and the contract in a folder on the sideboard and the merger hanging in the balance of a dinner she'd spent 3 years working toward. She stood at the window. She was not, she realized, thinking about the merger. She was thinking about Lily's painting in the school gymnasium, the backyard, the oak tree, the figure that might have been a woman. She was thinking about Owen at the diner saying, "You're carefully blank. That's different." She was thinking about Lily on the phone for 22 minutes, constructing a case against imprecise grading, her voice carrying that particular confidence of someone who has been told her whole life that what she thinks matters. Charlotte pressed her hand to the cold glass. She'd had an efficient life. She knew that. She'd built something from nothing, from boarding school loneliness and a father who didn't know what to do with her in 12 years old without a mother. She'd built it into something real, something with her name on the side of a building, something that mattered to people beyond herself. She did not regret the building of it. But Lily's voice saying, "I think you've been alone so long, you forgot you're not supposed to treat people like businesses," had opened something up that Charlotte had thought was simply part of her architecture. She told herself over the years that she was self-sufficient, that she'd chosen a particular kind of life and it suited her, that the loneliness was manageable and the management was fine. She'd been wrong, she thought, standing at the window at 2 in the morning. Not dramatically wrong. She hadn't been miserable. She hadn't been falling apart. Just quietly, persistently, in the way that wrong things you live with long enough start to feel normal. Wrong. The telescope caught the ambient light from the city. She walked to it, pointed it roughly where Jupiter should be, adjusted, and found it after a few minutes, steady and bright, slightly amber, the largest thing visible in the city-washed sky. She looked at it for a while. She thought, Lily asked me to show her this. She thought, there needs to be a next time for that to happen. She thought, I don't actually want there not to be a next time. The realization was quiet and irrevocable, and it sat in her chest like a stone she hadn't known she was carrying. She went back to bed, didn't sleep for another hour. Eventually did. The Vantage dinner was at the Meridian Club on the 43rd floor of a building 4 blocks north, a private dining room with a view and a level of quiet that only very expensive rooms achieve, where the service is invisible and the light is flattering and everything has been arranged to make the people inside feel that the conversation happening is the most important thing currently occurring anywhere. Charlotte wore black. It was the right choice, simple, authoritative, nothing that required interpretation. She was at the entrance when Owen arrived, and she did a brief involuntary assessment when she saw him. He was wearing a dark suit she hadn't seen before, well-fitted, not flashy, the right side of formal without trying too hard. He'd gotten a haircut. He didn't look like he was performing anything, which was both a relief and the thing she'd been counting on. You look, she started. Don't, he said, not unkindly. I was going to say appropriate. You were going to say something you'd regret in a formal context. He looked at her. You look like you haven't slept. I slept eventually. How's your head? Focused, she said. Which was true. Whatever had happened at 2 a.m. was internal territory. This was operational, and she was good at operational. Okay, he said. Tell me about Cade, the last-minute version. 73 fourth-generation money that he grew by himself rather than inherited. He sees the inheritance as a liability, not an asset, which means he responds to people who've built things. He'll test you. Nothing overt, just questions that are actually about character rather than business. He'll be warm, but he'll be watching. She paused. Don't oversell. He'll smell it immediately. I don't oversell, Owen said. I know. That's why I asked you. He looked at her for a moment. Charlotte. What? We're going to be fine. She looked at him. He said it the way he said most things, without embellishment, without the kind of false assurance that people deploy when they're not sure. He said it like he'd assessed the situation and reached a conclusion. How do you know? She asked. Because everything we're going to tell them tonight is true, he said. We met at your building. We spent time together. Your company has value and you have integrity, and the Statler piece is wrong. He paused. The only question is whether we can make Cade feel what's real rather than just hear it, and I think we can do that. Charlotte looked at him in the entrance of the Meridian Club. You sound very certain for a man who, until 3 weeks ago, had never heard of Vantage Capital, she said. I'm certain about the parts I have information on, Owen said. The rest I'll adjust as I go. Something in her expression that she hadn't meant to show. She straightened it quickly, but not quite fast enough. Come on, she said. They'll be here in 10 minutes. Harrison Cade was exactly what Charlotte had described. Warm in the specific way of men who've had decades to figure out how to make people comfortable while remaining in absolute control of every room they're in. He had white hair and a handshake that meant something and eyes that were doing more work than his conversation suggested. His wife, Margaret, was quieter and sharper, and Owen immediately understood that Cade's opinion of him would be substantially informed by Margaret's opinion, not the other way around. There were 4 others at the table, 2 from Vantage's board, Charlotte's CFO, Daniel Webb, and an attorney named Stern whose presence was largely architectural. Owen was introduced as Charlotte's partner. The word was used carefully, deliberately, and nobody asked for clarification. The first hour was the mechanics of it. Dinner, conversation, the kind of business talk that sounds social but is actually a series of carefully structured disclosures. Charlotte was extraordinary at this. Owen watched her move through it with the competence of someone who had spent years building exactly this kind of room, and he understood for the first time, watching her, that her reputation wasn't manufactured. She was genuinely good at this. Relentlessly, quietly good. Cade turned to Owen at a natural pause, somewhere in the second course. Charlotte tells me you run your own operation, Cade said. Facility management, Owen said. Commercial properties. 22 employees, been running it 6 years. Started it yourself? Yes, sir. How much startup capital? $11,000. He paused. And a lot of nights. Cade smiled, not the performing kind, the recognizing kind. What was the hardest year? Owen thought about it honestly rather than strategically. 3 years ago. My wife was sick and I was running the business and raising a daughter and managing medical stuff. Everything ran on fumes for about 8 months. The company didn't, technically, because I kept the work up. But I did. The table had gotten quieter. He hadn't performed it. He just said it, in the plain, honest way he said most things. You kept it running, Cade said. People depended on it. I had no other option I was willing to live with. Margaret Cade, who had been quiet and observing across the table, said, How old is your daughter? 8, Owen said. He almost said she's a piece of work, which was true and affectionate and probably not the right register. She's remarkable, he said instead. She has opinions about everything, and she's usually right. Margaret smiled. Harrison was the same at 8. He's still insufferable about being right. Cade made a noise of protest that was also an acknowledgement. The table relaxed slightly. Charlotte mentioned you two met through your building contract, Cade said. He said it without weight, but Owen heard the structure of the question underneath. She almost got taken out by one of my elevators, Owen said. Charlotte, across the table, went very slightly still, not visibly, not to anyone else. Owen kept going. I'd flagged the cable system, hadn't been fixed. She stepped out at the wrong moment. It was... He let out a breath. Honestly, it was bad. A few more seconds and it would have been serious. He looked at Charlotte across the table. She told me she was fine. She was bleeding. It was a bruise, Charlotte said. It was more than a bruise. You grabbed the doors, she said. And the way she said it was different from the way she'd said it in the hallway that first day. Not the automatic I'm fine response, but something more present. I grabbed the doors, Owen agreed. Cade was watching both of them. Owen could feel it without looking. He wasn't performing the exchange, it was just what had happened. But he understood that Cade was reading something in it. The way Charlotte had said you grabbed the doors, the specific weight of it. And then? Cade asked. And then she went to her meeting, Owen said. And I went back to work. And then... He paused. It took a while. She's not easy to get to know. Excuse me, Charlotte said. You're not, Owen said calmly. That's not a criticism. It sounds like one. It's an observation. He looked at Cade. She's private. She keeps things close. It takes time to understand who she actually is rather than who she presents. He paused. It was worth the time. The table was paying attention now. Not conspicuously, everyone still occupying their correct social positions, but paying attention. Cade said, What did you find? When you got there? Owen didn't rush the answer. Someone who works harder than almost anyone I've encountered, who genuinely cares about what she builds. Not the money part, the actual thing. Whether it works, whether it's right. He looked at Charlotte again. Someone who's tough in ways that are real and in ways that are habit, and who's starting to figure out the difference. Charlotte was looking at him. He couldn't entirely read her expression. She's the most honest person I know, Owen said. She won't tell you what you want to hear. She doesn't know how. Some people find that uncomfortable. I find it, he thought, reliable. I've had enough of comfortable and unreliable. Cade was quiet for a moment. He looked at Charlotte. Charlotte, for once, was looking at Owen rather than calculating her next move. The Statler piece, Cade said, finally shifting. The tax structure. Charlotte came back to the operational. The structure was designed by our legal and tax team and reviewed by 2 independent firms. It is aggressive. It is legal. It does not do what Statler claims it does. I can provide the full documentation tonight if you'd like it. I've seen documentation, Cade said. I want to know if you knew, when you approved it, that it would look like this. Yes, Charlotte said without hesitation. I knew it would be scrutinized. I still believe, that it withstands scrutiny. What I did not anticipate was a journalist with an anonymous source whose interpretation was wrong and who published before we could provide context. Would you have structured it differently, knowing? Charlotte paused. It was a real pause, not a strategic one. The structure itself, no. The communications around it, yes. I should have been more proactive about explaining it before someone else defined it. She held Cade's gaze. I don't always... She stopped. Started again. I'm better at the work than I am at telling the story of the work. I know that. I'm working on it. Owen recognized the effort that admission cost her. He wasn't sure Cade knew what he was seeing, but he thought Margaret did because Margaret was watching Charlotte with the quiet attention of someone recognizing something. She hired me because she thought she needed a different story, Owen said. Both Charlotte and Cade looked at him. He kept his voice level. A family story. Something that would make her more readable to you, Mr. Cade. He paused. I'm telling you this because you're looking for someone who tells you straight, and that's the straight version. The table went very quiet. Charlotte's face had gone through 3 distinct expressions in 3 seconds. Owen kept going. What I'm also telling you is that the story ended up being real, not because it was arranged to be, because... He looked at Charlotte. Because it just turned out that way. Cade looked between them. His expression was unreadable. You're telling me, Cade said slowly, that your partnership was initially transactional. Yes, Owen said, and now it isn't. It's more complicated than transactional, Owen said. In what direction? Owen held Cade's gaze. In the direction of real. The silence stretched. Margaret Cade looked at her husband. Something passed between them, the 30-second wordless conversation of people who have been married long enough to do that. Then Cade picked up his wine glass. Daniel, he said to Charlotte's CFO, I'd like to revisit the third quarter projections after dinner. I have some questions about the infrastructure timeline. He looked at Charlotte. Which means I'm inclined to continue the conversation. It was not a signed agreement. It was not a confirmation. But it was a door that had been closed and was now open, and everyone at the table understood that. Charlotte said, I'd be glad to. Her voice was steady. Everything in her was steady, held with the precision of someone who knows how to hold. Owen looked at his plate. Under the table, Charlotte's hand found his, briefly, not quite deliberately, just her fingers against the back of his hand for a moment before she pulled back and picked up her water glass. He wasn't sure she'd known she was going to do that. He wasn't sure she knew she had. The dinner ended at 10:30. Cade and Margaret left first, with handshakes that lasted the right amount of time and a parting remark from Cade about being in touch with Daniel's office by end of the week. Daniel Webb looked like a man who had survived something and was still processing it. Stern the attorney looked relieved in the exhausted way of attorneys. Charlotte and Owen stood in the entrance of the Meridian Club after everyone else had gone. The coat check attendant was pretending not to exist, which was their job. You told him, Charlotte said. Her voice was quiet and not quite readable. I told him the truth, Owen said. You told Harrison Cade that our relationship began as a contract. Yes. Charlotte looked at him. That was... She stopped. It worked, Owen said. That's not... She stopped again, pressed her lips together. You could have destroyed the entire evening. I knew it wouldn't. How? He looked at her. Because Cade isn't looking for a perfect story. He's looking for someone who doesn't manage him, and I don't. He paused. And neither do you, actually. That's what I was trying to show him. Charlotte stood there in the entrance of the Meridian Club, in her black dress, 3 years of work balanced on the outcome of a dinner that had just, by every available signal, gone well. She should have been relieved. She was, partly. But she was also looking at Owen Mercer with an expression she didn't know what to do with. Why did you say it was real? She asked, quietly. Not a challenge. A genuine question. Owen was quiet for a moment. Because from where I'm standing, he said, it is. Charlotte looked at him. The coat check attendant had decided to find something to do in the back. Owen, you don't have to say anything, he said. Not tonight. It doesn't need to be settled tonight. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she looked away. Not in retreat. More like she needed to look at something that wasn't making demands on her composure. I should tell you something, she said. About the contract. Owen waited. Charlotte reached into her bag and took out the folder. The one Marcus had filed the signed contract in 10 days ago, the same folder she'd brought to the dinner because she wasn't sure what she'd thought. She held it for a moment. Then she took out the contract. Owen watched her. She set the folder on the coat check counter and held the pages, 12 of them, signatures visible on the back page, and looked at them. Then she tore them. Not dramatically, not the single clean rip of a movie moment. She tore them carefully, methodically, in half, then half again, then kept going until what she was holding was a handful of small pieces that were no longer a document. Owen stood very still. "The money's already transferred," she said. "I'm not taking it back. Your house is covered. That's not contingent on the contract." She looked at the pieces in her hands. "I should have said that the first day instead of making it a transaction." Owen stared at her. "Charlotte." "I don't want the contract," she said. Looked up at him. "I want—" She stopped, collected herself. "I want to figure out what is actually here, without a document telling us what it has to be." The coat check attendant had definitively decided to be somewhere else. Owen looked at this woman who had just torn up a $5 million agreement and was standing in front of him holding the pieces with the expression of someone who has just done something irrevocable and is working out, only now, what it cost. "Okay," he said. She looked at him. "Okay? Okay." He paused. "What do you want to do with those?" Charlotte looked at the pieces in her hands, then at the coat check counter. Then she set them down neatly in a small pile, which was such a specifically Charlotte thing to do. Even the destruction was organized, that something in Owen's chest moved. "I'd like to go home," she said. "And I'd like to think and sleep and figure out what I actually just did." "That sounds right," Owen said. She put on her coat. He held the door. They walked out into the Chicago night, which was cold and clear, the L running somewhere in the middle distance, the city uninterested in the fact that something had shifted on the 43rd floor of a building on Michigan Avenue. Owen walked with her to the car, said goodnight, watched the car pull away. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. He called Lily's overnight babysitter, Mrs. Petrakis, from 3 doors down, who was 67 and reliably unflappable, to let her know he was on his way. Mrs. Petrakis said Lily was asleep and had been since 9:30 and had asked, before bed, whether the fancy dinner went okay. Owen said yes. The fancy dinner went okay. He started walking to where he'd parked the car. The cold air was something to breathe into. He breathed it, walked through it. Let the city do what cities do at 10:30 on a weeknight, which is to say, continue without caring about any single person moving through it. He thought about Charlotte's face when she tore the contract, the small pile of pieces on the coat check counter, the specific way she'd said, "I want to figure out what is actually here." He thought about Elena's photo on his desk, about Lily's laminated drawing, about the house with Gerald in the front yard and the draft in the upstairs window and the porch step that still needed fixing. He thought about a woman at a window looking for water, the same woman standing with a handful of torn paper. He thought, imperfect, and so are we. He got to his car, got in, sat for a moment. Then he drove home. The morning after this Vantage dinner, Owen woke up at 5:53 to Lily standing in his doorway, in her pajamas, holding a glass of water she'd gotten herself, which meant she'd been awake for a while. "Hey," he said. "Did it go okay?" she asked. "The dinner." "Yeah, it went okay." She stood there another moment. "Did Charlotte do good?" Owen pushed himself up against the headboard. The room was still dark except for the hallway light behind Lily. She was backlit, her curly hair loose and wild from sleep, the gap in her teeth visible when she talked. He looked at her and thought, not for the first time, that she was the best thing he'd ever had any part in. "Charlotte did great," he said. Lily nodded slowly, with the gravity of someone receiving a report she'd been waiting on. "Good." She drank some water. "I told Mrs. Petrakis you'd be home before 11, and she said she believed me, but I could tell she wasn't sure. I was home at 11:12. I know. I heard the door." She looked at her glass. "Dad?" "Yeah. Do you like her, Charlotte?" Owen looked at his daughter in the doorway. She wasn't asking it the way she'd asked at the penthouse. That had been tactical, information gathering, the the preliminary work of a person assessing a situation. This was quieter than that, more personal. I think so, he said. I'm still figuring it out. Lily considered this. That's okay, she said. You don't have to know yet. No? You told me once that rushing things just makes you get to the end faster. It doesn't make the end better. She shifted the glass to her other hand. You said that about cooking, but I think it applies. Owen rubbed his face. I said that about pasta. Still applies. He couldn't argue. He didn't try. Go back to sleep, Bug. It's not even 6. Lily looked at the clock on his nightstand, made a face. Okay. She turned to go, then stopped. Dad, did you? She started and stopped again, which was unusual. Lily usually knew what she wanted to say. What? He said. Did you tell her that you like her? Owen was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city was doing its 5 a.m. things. A distant siren, the first birds, the hum of the world getting started. Not exactly, he said. Lily looked at him with an expression he recognized as the one she used when she thought he was being unnecessarily complicated. Why not? Because it's more complicated than just, Dad? Lily. You always say things are complicated when you're scared, she said, with the mercilessness of children who love you. Owen opened his mouth, closed it. Go back to sleep, he said. I mean it. Lily went. Owen lay there in the dark, looking at the ceiling, and did not go back to sleep. What? Charlotte was in her office by 7, which was an hour later than usual. Marcus noticed this and said nothing. She had coffee she was actually drinking rather than letting go cold, and she was sitting at her desk in the particular way of someone whose body is present, but whose attention is somewhere else. She was thinking about the pieces of the contract on the coat check counter. She'd done it impulsively, or as close to impulsively as Charlotte Ashford got, which meant the decision had built up over several days and then executed quickly, which looked like an impulse from the outside, but was more like a conclusion she'd been reluctant to reach. She didn't regret it. She'd examined that question from several angles this morning, and she did not regret it. What she was less certain about was what she'd done instead. She'd said, I want to figure out what is actually here. Owen had said okay. And then they'd said goodnight, and he'd held the door and gone home to his daughter and his house with the oak tree. And Charlotte had gone home to her 47th floor and her telescope and the city below, and had lain awake until 2 working out the implications of what she'd said. The implications were significant. She had handed a stranger $5 million with no legal obligation attached to it. She had torn up the document that justified the dinner that was necessary for the merger. She had told Harrison Cade, indirectly through Owen, that she had been willing to construct a relationship for strategic purposes. And she had done this in a room where the wrong reading of it could have collapsed everything she'd spent 3 years building. And the dinner had gone well. Cade had opened the door. Daniel Webb had texted her at 10:45 with 2 exclamation points, which was the most emotionally demonstrative she had ever seen Daniel be. So the outcome was correct. The structure that had produced it was not the structure she'd planned. She was sitting with that. Marcus appeared in the doorway with a folder. Cade's office called at 7:30. They want to schedule a follow-up call with Daniel for Thursday. His assistant said, and I quote, that Mr. Cade came home from dinner last night in an unusually good mood, and Mrs. Cade said to pass along that Owen was lovely. Charlotte looked up. Mrs. Cade said that. Those were the words. Charlotte sat with this for a moment. Tell Daniel about Thursday, and she paused. Get Owen's business address, not his home, his business. Why? I'm going to have something sent. What? I don't know yet, Charlotte said. I'll figure it out. Marcus wrote this down without asking for clarification, which was one of his better qualities. Charlotte looked at her desk, at the empty space where the contract folder had been sitting for 2 weeks. She pulled up her calendar, looked at the next 3 months, the recurring structure of her life, the meetings and calls and international obligations and board engagements that filled it from edge to edge. She looked at it the way you sometimes look at a thing you've built and realize it has become both your shelter and your cage. She didn't cancel anything, not yet, but she looked at it differently than she had yesterday. That was something. What arrived at Mercer Building Services office address, 2 days after the Vantage dinner, was not flowers or a bottle of wine or anything Marcus would have suggested. It was a book, a paperback, slightly worn at the spine, which meant it was a copy Charlotte had actually read rather than ordered new. On the inside front cover she'd written, in handwriting that was precise and slightly angular, "Lily mentioned you underseason things. This is a cookbook with strong opinions about salt." See. Owen stood at his desk and looked at it for a moment. He texted her, "Did you send me a used cookbook?" 3 minutes later, "It's more useful than a new one. The margins have notes." He looked at the margins. She was right. There were small annotations in the same angular handwriting, brief and specific. More acid than you think next to a vinaigrette recipe. Do not skip this step emphatically next to something involving resting meat, and on a pasta page, circled, salt the water until it tastes like the sea. This is not an exaggeration. Owen stood at his desk in his small glass-walled office that faced a parking structure and felt something shift in him that he hadn't been expecting on a Wednesday morning. He texted back, "Lily's going to claim this immediately. Good. She should learn to cook. She's 8. She stirs pasta sauce. She's ready." Owen looked at the book, looked at the window, looked at Elena's photo on his desk. Elena laughing at something off camera. Curly hair, the particular light of a summer afternoon. He said quietly, to no one, "I know." He put the cookbook in his bag to take home. Thursday's call with Cade's office was 40 minutes and went well by all accounts. Daniel Webb called Charlotte afterward and said, "I think we're close, Charlotte. I actually think we're close, with the barely controlled relief of a CFO who has been staring down a deal gone wrong for 2 months." Charlotte told him to stay calm and document everything, and they'd meet Friday morning. She hung up and sat in the quiet of her office. Close. After 3 years of work and a Statler piece that had tried to burn it down, and a dinner where Owen had looked Harrison Cade in the eye and said, "I'm telling you this because you're looking for someone who tells you straight," and a torn contract in small pieces on a coat check counter, close. She called Owen. He picked up on the third ring, slightly out of breath, which meant he was on a job site. "Hey." Cade's office confirmed Thursday's call went well, she said. "Daniel thinks we're close." A pause in which she heard the ambient sound of a building doing whatever buildings did when someone was inside them working. "That's good," Owen said. "That's really good, Charlotte." "I know." She paused. "I wanted you to know." "I appreciate that." Another pause. The comfortable kind which was becoming more frequent between them. "Where are you?" she asked. "Wicker Park." "Retail property, their heating's been unreliable." He moved somewhere. She heard a door. "You?" "My office." Surprised. "That I'm in my office?" "That you called to tell me about the merger instead of just texting." Charlotte looked at her window. The lake was visible from here on clear days. Today it was. "I wanted to hear your voice when I told you," she said, and then stopped because it had come out more honest than she'd intended. Owen was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said, not making it bigger than it was, not deflecting, just receiving it. "I should let you work," she said. "Yeah, Charlotte." "What?" "I'm glad it's going to work." "The merger." He paused. "Not just because I'm glad for you. What you built. It should work." She sat with that for a moment. The specific weight of someone being glad for her, not impressed by her, not managing her, just glad. "Thank you," she said. She hung up, sat at her desk, looked at the lake. The following Saturday, Lily called Charlotte about Jupiter. "It's supposed to be clear tonight," Lily said. "I looked it up. Jupiter is visible in the southwest at about 9 o'clock. Charlotte was at her desk. It was Saturday. She often worked Saturdays. This was becoming something she was noticing about herself rather than simply accepting. "Is it?" "I told Dad about it, and he said it was past my bedtime, but that 9 o'clock was technically not that late." "That's a carefully constructed argument." "I thought so." A pause. "Can we come over to see it through your telescope?" Charlotte looked at the work on her desk. Quarterly projections, a draft response to a regulatory inquiry, an email from a board member she'd been meaning to read carefully. Yes, she said. Really? Why do you sound surprised? You usually work on Saturdays. Charlotte looked at the desk. I'm going to stop doing that, she said, and then was slightly surprised that she'd said it, because she hadn't fully decided it until the words were out. Really? Lily said again, with more emphasis. Don't push it, Charlotte said. Come at 8:30. They came at 8:30, Owen with a jacket, Lily with her blanket already under her arm in anticipation of the couch she'd claimed, and a container of something. What's that? Charlotte asked, looking at the container. Dad made pasta, Lily said. He used your cookbook, the salt note. Charlotte looked at Owen. It's a lot of salt, Owen said. The note says it's not an exaggeration. It's really a lot of salt. Did it taste right? He looked at her. Yeah, it tasted right. Charlotte stood aside to let them in. Lily went immediately to the couch, installed her blanket, and began examining the apartment with the proprietary attention of someone returning to a place she considers at least partially hers. Owen set the container on the kitchen counter. You didn't have to bring food, Charlotte said. We ate before we came. It's for you. He paused. Have you eaten? Charlotte thought about it. She'd had lunch. She wasn't sure about dinner. More or less, she said. Owen looked at her with the expression he used when he thought she was being imprecise. Charlotte, I had a protein bar at 3. That's not... He stopped. Opened a cabinet. He'd done this enough times to know where things were now. Found a bowl. Sit down. I'll heat it up. You don't need to... Sit. Charlotte sat. She watched Owen move around her kitchen with the unfussy competence he brought to everything physical. No performance, no announcement, just doing the thing. He heated the pasta, found her Parmesan, also from his cookbook-inspired grocery run. She'd bought it on his recommendation, and put it in front of her. Eat, he said. She ate. He sat across the counter and watched, not making it weird, just present. It's good, she said. The salt was right. The pasta had a roughness to it that you didn't get from catered food, the kind that meant a person had made it. Yeah, Owen said. The cookbook helps. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway. Is it 9 yet? 20 minutes, Charlotte said. Lily made a considering noise and retreated. Owen and Charlotte sat in the kitchen in the quiet. The merger's going to close, Owen said. Not a question. Probably next week, Charlotte said. Daniel is cautiously optimistic, which means he's actually optimistic. Good. He looked at the counter. What happens after, when it closes? Work, Charlotte said. The integration will take 18 months at minimum. There's a whole infrastructure in Southeast Asia that needs... She stopped, looked at him. You're asking something else. I'm asking what you want to happen, Owen said. After, for you. Charlotte held the pasta bowl between both hands. It was warm. I don't usually plan for that, she said. I plan for the next thing, the work thing. What about the non-work thing? She looked at him. In her kitchen, under the slightly impractical pendant lighting she'd chosen because she'd liked it, without thinking about whether it was useful, with the city outside and Lily in the other room determining through some private calculation whether it was yet 9 o'clock. I think I want... She started and stopped. I think I want more evenings like this one, she said. I don't have a plan beyond that. Owen looked at her for a moment, then he nodded, the way he nodded when something confirmed what he'd already been thinking. That works, he said. Does it? Yeah, he said. It does. They went to the study at 9:15, all 3 of them. Charlotte pointed the telescope, adjusted, found it. Jupiter, steady and amber, exactly where it was supposed to be. Lily looked first. She was silent for a long time, which was unusual enough that both Owen and Charlotte let it go unaddressed. It's really there, Lily said finally. Not surprised, more like something she'd understood in theory was now understood in fact. Like, it's actually just there. 490 million miles away, more or less, Charlotte said. But there. But there, Charlotte agreed. Lily stepped back from the eyepiece, looked at Charlotte. Thank you for letting me come. You invited yourself, Charlotte said. I know. Thank you for letting me anyway. Something passed between them. Not a moment. Exactly. Not the kind of thing you could name with precision. Just a truth acknowledged and received. Charlotte nodded once. Lily nodded back. 8-year-old and 30-year-old speaking the same language for a second, the one that has nothing to do with words. Owen looked through the telescope. He found Jupiter quickly. Charlotte had already adjusted it perfectly. He looked at it for a while. Elena would have liked this, he said. It came out quiet, not heavy, just true. Neither Charlotte nor Lily said anything for a moment. Tell me something about her, Charlotte said. Owen pulled back from the telescope. He looked at Charlotte, assessing something, though not with suspicion, more like making sure it was the right time. She could read a room in about 8 seconds, he said. She'd walk into a party, and within a few minutes she'd know who was unhappy, who was pretending, who wanted to leave. She was never wrong. He paused. She used it gently. She'd go find the person who was struggling and just stand with them, talk to them. She didn't make a production of it. She sounds kind, Charlotte said. She was. She was also stubborn, and she had a temper when she was tired, and she put cheese on things that didn't need it. He looked at Lily, which someone inherited. Cheese makes things better, Lily said firmly. Cheese on rice, Lily. The canvas, Lily said. Owen shook his head, but the expression on his face was one Charlotte had been learning to recognize. The specific grief-tinged warmth of a person who has loved someone deeply enough that the remembering hurts and comforts at the same time. Charlotte stood in her study with these two people and felt, quietly and without announcement, that she had not been this close to something real in a very long time, possibly ever. She didn't say it. It wasn't the moment for it, but she felt it. The merger closed on a Tuesday, 12 days after the Vantage dinner. Daniel Webb called Charlotte at 2:17 in the afternoon, his voice carrying the specific exhaustion and relief of someone who has been living in a high-stakes situation long enough that its resolution almost doesn't feel real. It's done, he said. Cade signed this morning. Legal confirmed an hour ago. Charlotte, it's done. Charlotte sat at her desk and breathed in. Good, she said. Good work, Daniel. I mean it. She called her attorney, her Singapore contact. She sent a brief email to the board. She handled the immediate operational reality of what closing a $4.3 billion merger actually required in the first 2 hours, which was considerable. Then she stopped. Sat in her office. Let it be quiet. She thought about the building she'd commissioned at 26, the ribbon she'd cut at 30, standing in front of cameras and a city council that didn't know what to make of her, thinking it was the most permanent thing she'd ever made. She thought, I was right that it was permanent. I was wrong that it was enough. She picked up her phone. She didn't call Marcus. She called Owen. He picked up on the second ring. It closed, she said. A pause. She could hear the particular silence of him absorbing it, the full weight of what it meant, not just the business part, but everything that had led to it. Charlotte, he said. I know, she said. How do you feel? She thought about it honestly. Relieved, tired, like I want to eat a real meal and go to sleep before midnight. She paused. And like I want to tell you in person, which I just did on the phone, which doesn't quite work. Owen was quiet for a moment. Come to dinner, he said. Tonight. The house. Charlotte paused. He'd never invited her to the house before. She'd been aware of its existence. 2214 Weston Avenue, the bungalow Elena had chosen, the oak tree named Gerald. But she hadn't been there. It felt like a different kind of threshold than the penthouse. Different territory, different weight. Are you sure? She said. Lily's been asking, he said. And I want to cook you a real dinner, properly salted. Charlotte looked at her desk. The merger files, the projections, the email from the board member she'd been meaning to read for a week. What time? She said. 7. I'll be there, she said. Thank you. 2214 Weston Avenue was exactly what Owen had described, and exactly what she'd imagined, and somehow different from both. From the outside, a 1940s bungalow on a block that was still making up its mind, porch light on, Gerald massive and leafless in the front yard, the slightly uneven porch step Owen had mentioned once and apparently still hadn't fixed. She stood outside it for a moment before going up. The house had a presence. That was the only word for it, not in a mystical sense, just in the sense that some houses absorb what happens in them, the life that gets lived inside, and it accumulates in the walls and the light and the way a door opens. You could feel it from the porch. She knocked. Lily opened the door before the second knock because she had clearly been watching from somewhere. "Hi," Lily said. She was in her B-shirt and socks and she had paint on her left hand from something she'd apparently been doing that afternoon. "Dad's finishing the sauce. It smells really good. I helped a little." "You stirred," Owen called from somewhere inside. "Stirring is helping," Lily said to Charlotte. "Come in." Charlotte came in. The house was small in the way that felt intentional rather than lacking. Rooms that were the right size for being in rather than for impressing people. The living room had a couch that had been lived on, books on a low shelf arranged without system, one of Lily's drawings taped to the wall at child height next to a framed photograph of a street somewhere that looked like it might be Mexico. The kitchen was through a doorway, warm and lit, smelling of garlic and tomatoes and the particular warmth of a house where someone has been cooking. On the mantel, Elena, several photographs. A few together with Owen, one just her, one with a newborn Lily, who was mostly visible as a small bundled shape in Elena's arms. Charlotte looked at them without pretending not to, which felt like the only honest approach. "That's my mom," Lily said, appearing beside her. "I know," Charlotte said. "She was pretty." She was. Lily looked at the photos alongside Charlotte. "I forget what her voice sounded like," she said. "Sometimes I try to remember and I can't. And then other times I'll hear something and it'll sound like her. And I'll know it's right, but I can't. Keep it." She looked at Charlotte. "Does that happen with yours? Your mom?" Charlotte looked at the girl beside her. "Yes," she said. "Yes, it does." Lily nodded. Didn't say anything else about it, just stood there with Charlotte for a moment, looking at Elena's photographs, the two of them in their separate griefs that were also somehow, in this moment, adjacent to each other. Owen appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at them, Charlotte and Lily at the mantel, and something moved through his face that he didn't try to manage. 10 minutes, he said. They ate at the kitchen table, which was smaller than Charlotte's, and had a slight wobble Owen had fixed with a folded piece of cardboard under one leg, which Charlotte discovered when she put her elbow on it, and it shifted slightly. She looked at it. "I've been meaning to," Owen started. "It's fine," Charlotte said. It was actually fine. The pasta was excellent, better than the penthouse version, better than the diner where they'd first really talked, better than anything Charlotte had eaten in the last several weeks. It was the kind of meal where you could taste that someone had paid attention to it, not performing attention, just actually giving it. "The salt," Charlotte said. "The salt," Owen agreed. "I was right about the note." "You were right about the note." Lily looked between them. "Are you going to talk about the pasta the whole time?" "We might," Owen said. "That seems inefficient," Lily said, and returned to eating. After dinner, Lily showed Charlotte her school project, the final version with the A- and the teacher's note and Lily's extensive marginalia in response to the note that she'd added in pencil. Charlotte read all of it, including the marginalia. She said, "Your argument about the specificity of the critique is valid. I would have pushed back too." Lily looked vindicated in a way that was deeply satisfying to her. "That's what I thought." "The A- is still right, though," Charlotte added. "Your sourcing in Section 2 was thin." Lily looked slightly less vindicated. "It was developing," she said. "Develop it and resubmit if they let you. They don't do that in third grade. Start lobbying now. By the time it matters in high school, you'll have established the precedent." Lily looked at Charlotte with the expression of someone encountering a tactical approach she hadn't considered. "That's actually smart." "I know," Charlotte said. Owen watched them from across the table and said nothing, because there was nothing to add and everything to observe. Lily went to bed at 9:30 with minimal argument, which Owen interpreted as a sign she was either genuinely tired or strategically choosing not to fight a battle she didn't need to fight. With Lily, it was rarely possible to know which. He got her settled, teeth, water. The chapter of Phantom Toll Booth they were nearly at the end of now, which meant soon they'd have to find the next book, which Lily had opinions about and had been canvassing. He came back downstairs to find Charlotte standing at the kitchen sink washing dishes. He stopped in the doorway. "You don't—" he started. "I found the soap," she said, not turning around. "Where are your dish towels?" He got them from the drawer. He dried while she washed, which was not a dynamic he had predicted for this evening, and which was ordinary. Deeply, strangely ordinary. "Did you call your father?" Owen asked. "About the merger." Charlotte rinsed a bowl, handed it to him. "No." "Will you?" "Eventually, when I have something to say beyond the news itself." Owen dried the bowl. "What would you want to say?" She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. She handed him another bowl. "We talk occasionally. It's not hostile. It's just, we're strangers who are related. It's been long enough that we've both adjusted to that, and neither of us has been willing to do the work of unadjusting. Do you want to?" Charlotte looked at the water running over her hands. "Sometimes," she said. "More lately." "What changed?" She looked at him sideways. He was standing close. The kitchen was small, drying the bowl she'd handed him. "I think you know what changed," she said. Owen set the bowl down. Charlotte turned off the water. They stood at the sink, not quite facing each other, the kitchen quiet, the house making its nighttime sounds, the refrigerator, the furnace, the last of the autumn wind finding its way through the slightly drafty upstairs window. "Charlotte," Owen said. She turned to face him. "I've been thinking about something since the diner," he said. "The first time. You said you'd been alone so long you'd forgotten to be anyone's person." "Lily said that," Charlotte said. "I agreed with it." "I know. I've been thinking about it since." He looked at her. The distance between them was small. The kitchen made it small, but it also felt like a choice, the not moving away. "I've been in the habit of being someone's person, Lily's person, Elena's person. That's the whole architecture of the last 8 years, and I'm not going to pretend it hasn't been its own kind of closed." Charlotte looked at him. Her expression was the one he'd been seeing more often, the unmanaged version, the one without the careful neutral surface. "I'm not asking you to be anything you're not ready to be," Owen said. "I want to say that clearly." "I know," she said. "I know you're not." She looked at the dish towel in his hand, then back up at him. "I'm not scared of what I want," she said. I don't have a good track record with this. The staying, being present. I built an empire partly because I was better at work than at people, and I knew it." "You're here," Owen said, "in this kitchen, washing dishes. I know where I am. I mean," he stopped. "You chose this. Over the office, over the work. You're here, and the building didn't fall down." Charlotte looked at him. "No," she said. "It didn't." He set the dish towel down on the counter. She was still looking at him, and whatever she'd been managing all evening, the careful calibration, the watching of herself from the outside, she'd let go of, or it had let go of her, one or the other. He kissed her. Or she kissed him. It was the kind of thing that happened between two people where the origin point was genuinely unclear, because both of them had been moving toward it, and neither had been the only one to move. It was brief, not tentative, but short, and when it ended they were both still there, close, in the small kitchen that smelled like garlic and dish soap. "Oh," Charlotte said, very quietly. "Yeah," Owen agreed. She looked at him. Her eyes were doing something he'd seen only a few times, the unguarded version, the one without the peripheral vision working overtime. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said. "I want to be honest about that." "That makes two of us," he said. It's been a long time since He exhaled. "I'm figuring it out too." "Can we figure it out slowly?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "We can figure it out slowly." She nodded. Something settled in her face, not resolution exactly, more like permission. Owen reached over and picked up the dish towel again, handed her a pot to rinse. She took it, rinsed it, handed it back. They finished the dishes. She left at 11. Owen walked her to her car, not because she needed it, but because he wanted to, and she let him because she understood the distinction. At the car, she turned. "Your porch step," she said. "I know, it's on the list." "Fix it before someone gets hurt." "Yes," he said, with the patience of a man who has heard a true thing and is accepting it. She looked at him. The street was quiet, Gerald enormous and bare above them, the porch light on. The house with its accumulated life sitting solid and imperfect behind Owen's shoulder. "This is a good house," she said. Owen looked at it. "Yeah," he said. "It is." Elena was right about it. He looked at Charlotte. There was something in his expression, not pain, or not just pain, something larger than that. "Yeah," he said. She was. Charlotte got in her car. Owen stood on the sidewalk while she pulled away, the way he'd stood on Michigan Avenue after the Vantage dinner, watching, still, the city doing its thing around him. He stood there a moment after the car turned the corner. Then he went back up the porch steps, carefully avoiding the uneven third one, and went inside. The week after the merger closed was the first week in 3 years that Charlotte rearranged her calendar in response to something other than a business emergency. She kept her mornings for work. The integration planning was real. 18 months was not an exaggeration. There were structural and legal and operational demands that she couldn't and wouldn't put down. But she stopped scheduling calls past 6 on weekdays. She blocked Tuesday and Thursday evenings. She told Marcus once and clearly that she needed him to push back when she was filling time with meetings that were low value and high frequency, which she knew she did, and which she'd always privately justified as discipline and was now recognizing as avoidance. Marcus said, "I've been waiting for you to say that for 2 years. Charlotte looked at him. "You could have said something. You would have told me to stay in my lane." She considered this. "Probably," she admitted. "Don't let me do that again." "I'll do my best," he said, in the tone of a man making a reasonable but not unconditional promise. She went to Weston Avenue on Thursday, and on the following Tuesday. She and Owen were careful with each other, not timidly, but with the deliberateness of two people who understood that what they were doing was real enough to deserve care. They talked more than they did anything else. The talking was its own kind of intimacy, its own slowly building architecture. Lily absorbed Charlotte's increased presence with the equanimity of someone who had predicted this outcome and was satisfied but not smug. She integrated Charlotte into the household's rhythms without ceremony, setting a third place without being asked, sharing her reading recommendations with the assumption they'd be followed up on. And once, when Charlotte arrived on a Thursday before Owen was home from a job site, simply letting her in and resuming her homework at the kitchen table as if this required no particular comment. Charlotte sat across from her and read while Lily worked. After about 15 minutes, Lily looked up. "You read fast." "I've been catching up," Charlotte said. "On what?" "Things I delayed for a long time." She turned a page. "That Joan Didion I had on my shelf. 12 novels I've been meaning to read. Your telescope book." Lily perked up. "You got the telescope book?" "The one you texted me about, yes." Lily abandoned her homework entirely in favor of asking Charlotte questions about focal length and Jupiter's moons that Charlotte could answer about half of and had to admit ignorance about the other half, which Lily appeared to find reassuring rather than disappointing. Further evidence in Lily's internal assessment that Charlotte was becoming a more honest and therefore more trustworthy person. Owen came home at 6:15 to find them at the kitchen table with the telescope book between them, in the middle of an argument about whether Europa could actually support life, which apparently was a contested question with strong advocates on both sides. He stood in the kitchen doorway with his jacket and his cracked thermos and looked at them. "Hi," Lily said without looking up. "Hey," Charlotte said, also without looking up. Owen set his bag down, got a glass of water, sat at the table, waited a moment. "Europa," Charlotte said to Lily, "has a subsurface ocean that could theoretically support basic microbial life given the right conditions." "But we don't know the conditions," Lily said. "We don't. That's the point. The unknown is where the possibility lives." You're an optimist, Lily said, with the tone of someone making a scientific observation. I'm a pragmatist who has looked at the evidence, Charlotte said. Those aren't mutually exclusive, Lily said. Charlotte looked at her. No, she said, they're not. Owen drank his water and watched them argue about Europa, and felt the weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it had a shape begin, very slightly, very slowly, to redistribute itself. He didn't mention it. He just sat there in his kitchen, in his house, and let the evening be what it was. A month after the Vantage merger closed, Owen fixed the porch step. It took 40 minutes on a Saturday morning, a piece of pressure-treated lumber, 4 screws, a level, the drill from the garage he'd gotten out 3 separate times over the past several months, and put back. Charlotte wasn't there when he did it. She was in her office, working on integration planning, being slowly and imperfectly better at leaving by 6. But when she came on Thursday, she stepped on the 3rd step, and it held. And she stopped for a second. Owen was holding the door. You fixed it, she said. I fixed it, he said. She looked at him. He looked back at her. It was not a large moment. It was a very small one, the kind that doesn't announce itself. She stepped up and went inside, and he followed, and the door closed. And the step held. Winter came to Chicago the way it always did, without apology, without transition. Just one morning, the temperature dropped 15 degrees and didn't come back up, and Gerald stood in the front yard at 2214. Weston Avenue stripped and enormous against a white sky, and Lily put on her coat for the first time since March and declared that she had grown 2 inches since last year because the sleeves were short. She had grown. Owen measured her against the doorframe in the kitchen, the same doorframe where he'd been marking her height since she was 3. Small pencil lines with dates in his handwriting, the record of a person becoming, and the new mark sat a full 1.5 inches above November of the previous year. Told you, Lily said. You told me, Owen agreed. Does Charlotte know I grew? Owen looked at his daughter. Why would Charlotte need to know that? Because she said I was going to be formidable when I grow up, and I want her to know the process is happening. Owen wrote the date next to the new mark. You can tell her yourself. Lily nodded, as if this had been her plan all along. She texted Charlotte that afternoon. I grew 1.5 inches. The formidable process is underway. Charlotte, who was in a meeting with 3 senior members of the Vantage integration team, felt her phone buzz. She waited until a natural pause in the conversation, looked at it under the table, and experienced something she was still not fully accustomed to. A warmth that arrived without warning and had nothing to do with anything being accomplished. She typed back, Noted. Keep me updated on the timeline. Lily responded with a thumbs-up emoji, followed by a drawing of a ruler, which Charlotte was fairly certain required a specialized keyboard she didn't have, and which Lily had therefore assembled from available materials with characteristic determination. Charlotte put her phone away, returned to the meeting, caught Marcus's eye across the table, and looked away before he could register anything. He registered it anyway. He always did. Shep. December arrived and brought with it the particular pressure of the holiday season layered over the already considerable pressure of a merger integration that was, by most measures, going well but not smoothly, because large things never go smoothly. They go forward, which is different. Charlotte was spending more evenings at Weston Avenue than she was spending in her penthouse, a fact she'd noticed and accepted rather than analyzing to death. She kept clothes in a bag she hadn't entirely unpacked, which was a form of commitment she felt comfortable with for the time being. Owen didn't comment on the bag. Lily had asked once whether Charlotte was staying over, and Owen had said sometimes, and Lily had said okay and gone back to her homework. The not making it complicated was, Charlotte was learning, its own kind of intimacy. Owen was good at it. He didn't ask for declarations or timelines. He made space and let her occupy it at whatever rate felt real, and in the absence of pressure, she found herself moving toward rather than away from, which was new information about herself. She was accumulating new information about herself with some frequency lately. For instance, she was bad at doing nothing. She'd known this in the abstract. She'd never been a person who could sit without occupation, but she hadn't understood the specific texture of it until she tried, deliberately, to have an evening with no work and no agenda, just time. She'd lasted 40 minutes before picking up a book, which Owen told her counted as rest. She'd told him she wasn't sure she believed him. He'd said she could figure it out with practice. She was practicing. She was, by her own admission to no one, worse at it than almost everything else she'd ever tried to learn, and she'd tried to learn difficult things. It turned out the difficulty wasn't the absence of something to do. It was the absence of something to prove. She'd spent 30 years proving. The building was there. The merger was done. The empire was real. She'd proven it. And on the other side of the proof was this kitchen, this table, this man making pasta, this child who had grown 1.5 inches and needed her to know about it. It was smaller than what she'd built. It was also larger than she'd known how to hold. Christmas at Weston Avenue was not planned so much as accumulated. Lily had mentioned in early December that she and Owen usually got a real tree rather than an artificial one because her mother had been anti-artificial tree on environmental grounds and also on the grounds that artificial trees smelled like nothing. And what was the point of a tree that smelled like nothing? Charlotte had agreed, which Lily had noted. Then Lily had mentioned with studied casualness that this year she thought it would be nice to have more people involved in getting the tree. Owen had looked at Lily. Lily had looked at the wall. Owen had called Charlotte. The three of them went to a tree lot on a Saturday morning, which was cold enough that Charlotte bought a cup of bad coffee from the vendor at the entrance just to have something to warm her hands on. Lily was deeply serious about tree selection. She walked the rows with the concentration of a structural engineer assessing load-bearing capacity, rejecting several candidates for reasons she articulated clearly. Too sparse on the left, wrong proportions, suspiciously few bottom branches, one that was simply, according to Lily, trying too hard. Trees can't try, Owen said. This one is, Lily said, and moved on. Charlotte walked beside Owen, trailing Lily by a respectful distance. Her coffee was terrible and warm, and she was drinking it anyway. Is she always like this? With important things, Owen said. She's decisive about small things. Big things, she takes her time. She's 9. Going on 45, depending on the situation. Charlotte watched Lily reject another tree. This time, apparently on aesthetic grounds, she declined to share. She's going to run something someday. She's going to run everything, Owen said. No particular pride in his voice. More like acknowledging a fact of the physical world. The sky is blue. Lily is going to run everything. Charlotte looked at him. You're not worried about that? Why would I be? Most parents want their kids to be, she searched for the word, manageable. Owen looked at her sideways. Elena wasn't manageable. Neither are you. He paused. I seem to be fine with that as a pattern. Charlotte looked at her terrible coffee. We'll take this one, Lily announced from somewhere to their left. The tree was a Fraser fir, 7 feet, symmetrical, full but not excessive. It was, objectively, the correct tree. Charlotte and Owen looked at it and looked at each other and said nothing because there was nothing to add. They got the tree. They decorated it that evening, Owen and Lily and Charlotte, with the particular organized chaos of a family that has done this before, and one person who hasn't, trying to figure out where to be useful. The ornaments came out of a box that had masking tape labels in different handwritings, which Charlotte understood, after a moment, meant some were Owen's labels and some were Elena's. Lily handled the box carefully, not sadly, just carefully, with the attention of someone who understands what a thing holds. There was a glass ornament, pale blue, painted with a small winter landscape. Lily held it for a moment before putting it on the tree, high up where it would catch the light. Mom got that one the year before she got sick, Lily said. She said blue was underrepresented in our Christmas color scheme. Charlotte looked at the ornament on the branch. She was right. She usually was, Lily said. Then, to Owen, help me with the star. Owen got the step stool. Lily climbed it, Owen holding the sides, and fixed the star to the top with the particular seriousness she brought to ceremonial moments. When it was straight, she climbed down and stood back. The three of them looked at the tree. It's good, Lily said. It's great, Owen said. Charlotte said nothing because she was looking at the blue ornament, and at Lily, and at Owen's hand on the step stool he hadn't moved yet. And she was thinking about accumulation, how lives accumulate, how houses accumulate, how a person can walk into something gradually and then look up one day and realize they're inside it. All the way inside. Not visiting. She was inside this. She hadn't noticed the exact moment. Maybe there hadn't been an exact moment. Maybe that was the point. Charlotte, Lily said. She looked over. You're allowed to say it's great, Lily said, with patient generosity. We know you don't usually say that kind of thing, but this is a specific context. Charlotte looked at the tree, at the blue ornament, at Lily, who had grown 1.5 inches and was going to keep growing, formidably, indefinitely. It's great, Charlotte said. Lily nodded, satisfied. Yeah, she said. It is. New Year's Eve was the first time Charlotte talked to her father in 4 months. She called him, which she hadn't initiated in longer than that. He picked up on the 4th ring, sounding slightly surprised, which she understood. She would have been surprised too. Charlotte. Hi, Dad. A pause that was not quite uncomfortable. How are you? Good. Actually good. She was sitting by her north window, the telescope beside her, the city lighting up below in anticipation of midnight. The Vantage merger closed. I read about it, he said. Congratulations, it was a significant deal. It was. Another pause. I also read about the Statler piece, he said. Earlier. I meant to call. You didn't have to. I know I didn't have to, he said, and something in his voice was different from the careful stranger register they usually used with each other. I wanted to, He stopped in a way she recognized, because she did it too, the stopping before the thing that required more than they were used to giving. I'm not good at calling, Charlotte, I know that. I've always known that. Neither am I, she said. I'm trying to get better at it. A silence. Your mother would have called, he said, quietly. Not as an accusation, more like a fact he'd been carrying. She would have, Charlotte agreed. I think about that sometimes. How different. He stopped again. You shouldn't have had to go to boarding school the way you did, after. I want you to know I understand that now. I understood it earlier than now. I wasn't good at saying it. Charlotte sat by the window. The city was lit up and expectant. Dad, she said. Yes. I know, she said. I've known for a while. She paused. I think I've been waiting for you to say it, which I should have said earlier, so we both should have said things earlier. He was quiet. She could hear him breathing, an old man in a house in Connecticut, on New Year's Eve, 71 years old, the father of a daughter he'd put on a train to boarding school at 13 and never quite figured out how to get back. I'd like to see you, he said. If that's something you'd want. Charlotte looked at the telescope, at the city, at the new year about to start. I'd want that, she said. Come to Chicago, in the spring. She paused. There are people I'd like you to meet. Another silence, longer this time. All right, he said, slightly unsteady, but steady enough. Spring. Spring, she confirmed. They talked for another 20 minutes, not about much, not about anything large, just talk, the ordinary patching together of two people who have been strangers too long and are starting to remember they don't have to be. It wasn't resolution. It wasn't the sudden undoing of 30 years of managed distance. It was just a beginning, which is what beginnings are. Small and uncertain and entirely dependent on what comes after. She hung up at 11:40, sat for a moment, then picked up her phone again and called Owen. Hey, he said. There was noise in the background, Lily probably, and possibly the television, the particular sound of a household on a holiday. I called my father, she said. A pause. Yeah? We talked for 20 minutes. He's coming to Chicago in the spring. Owen was quiet for a moment. Charlotte. I know, she said. How do you feel? She thought about it the way he'd taught her to, not the reflex answer, the actual one. Like I opened a window in a room I'd stopped entering, she said. And the air is cold because it's been closed for a long time. But it's air. That's good, he said. It's a beginning, she said. That's what air is, he said. A beginning. She looked out the window at the city counting down to midnight. Are you watching the ball drop? Lily insists. She says the cultural significance outweighs the commercial aspects. Charlotte almost smiled. She's not wrong. She's never wrong, Owen said. It's something I've accepted. In the background, she heard Lily say something she couldn't make out, and Owen say something back, and then Lily's voice again, closer to the phone deliberately. Tell Charlotte Happy New Year from me. She can hear you, Owen said. Happy New Year, Charlotte, Lily said, fully voiced now, at the phone. Charlotte looked at her window, at the city, at the telescope in the north sky and the cold, clear night. Happy New Year, Lily, she said. She sat by the window and watched the fireworks start, distant and silent from this height, just color against the dark, the city celebrating the ordinary turning of a year. She sat there until they faded, and then she sat a little longer, and it was neither uncomfortable nor empty. It was quiet. It was hers. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough. Not because nothing else existed, but because the things that existed were real. Spring, when it came, was late and abrupt the way Chicago springs were, cold through March, tentatively warm in April, and then 1 week in early May when the temperature jumped 20 degrees and everyone walked around slightly dazed by the existence of sunlight, as if they'd forgotten it was a thing. Gerald put out leaves. Owen noticed this on a Tuesday morning and stood on the porch for a moment, just looking at the tree, the particular green of new leaves that doesn't look like any other green. He'd been meaning to look at Gerald for a while. The oak had been there through a lot. It seemed right to acknowledge the spring. Lily came onto the porch in her socks, which he'd told her not to do approximately 800 times. Socks, he said. I know, she said, and stood beside him looking at Gerald. He looks good. He does. She put her hand on the porch railing. Is Charlotte's dad still coming this weekend? Saturday, Owen said. Lily nodded. She'd been told about Richard Ashford, enough to understand the context, not more than she needed. She had, without being asked, an opinion about the situation. She'd kept it to herself for 2 weeks, which was an unusually long period of restraint. Is Charlotte nervous? She asked. Probably, Owen said. She won't say so. No, Lily looked at Gerald. We should have them to dinner, Saturday, after they see each other in the day. So she has somewhere to come, she paused. So it's not just them in a room, in case it's hard. Owen looked at his daughter, 9 years old, socks on the porch, solving problems she hadn't been asked to solve, for someone she'd decided was worth the effort. That's a good idea, he said. I know, Lily said. What are we making? Whatever you want. Pasta, she said immediately, with the salt. Obviously, Owen said. Richard Ashford was a tall man who'd gone thin in old age, with white hair and the slightly formal bearing of someone who'd spent a long time performing composure and couldn't entirely stop. He arrived in Chicago on a Saturday morning in May, looking like a man who wasn't certain of his welcome and was trying not to show it, which Charlotte recognized because she'd spent 30 years doing the same thing and could spot it in another person the way you can spot a habit you've broken. They met at a restaurant near the lake, neutral territory. Both of them understood this without saying it. He ordered coffee. She ordered the same. They looked at menus they weren't really reading. You look well, he said. I'm better than well, she said. Not unkindly, just accurately. He looked at her. Something in his face. He was 71 and had the face of a man who'd let time accumulate on it without much resistance, which she found oddly comforting. I can see that, he said. I'm glad. Are you? Charlotte. I'm not. She stopped, started again. I'm not being difficult. I'm asking genuinely, because we've spent a long time being polite to each other, and I'd rather not spend more of it that way. He held her gaze. He had her eyes, she'd always known that, the same gray, the same quality of paying more attention than they disclosed. Yes, he said, I'm genuinely glad. You were... After your mother, I was so far out of my depth that I made choices I couldn't undo. I knew when I made them that I couldn't undo them. I made them anyway, because I didn't know what else to do. He looked at his coffee. That's not an excuse. I've been trying to work out for 20 years whether it counts as an explanation. Charlotte sat across from her father in a restaurant near Lake Michigan in the spring, 30 years old, and let herself feel the weight of what had been lost and what hadn't been, and what might still be possible, because she'd been learning, slowly, from a man who fixed heating systems and an 8-year-old who stirred pasta sauce. That possible was a larger category than she'd been treating it as. It counts as an explanation, she said. It just doesn't fix anything. No, he said, it doesn't. Fixing takes longer, she said, and involves more effort from both sides. He looked at her. Are you willing? She thought about the phone call on New Year's Eve, about the window she'd opened in a room she'd stopped entering, about the cold air that was still air. Yes, she said. Are you? Yes, he said, immediately, without the pause she'd expected, which told her something. Which was, she realized, part of why she'd asked. They had breakfast. They talked. Not about everything, not about the years she'd spent at boarding school or what it had been like at 12 years old to understand that she was being given away to an institution because her father couldn't manage her existence. They didn't go there yet. They went to smaller things, the merger, which he'd followed more closely than she'd known, his house in Connecticut, which had a garden he'd been neglecting, a book he'd read recently that she'd read too, the incremental mapping of two people who have been strangers long enough that they have to find the overlaps before they can find the center. It was difficult. It was also possible. Both things were true. At noon, Charlotte said, "There are people I want you to meet tonight, if you're up for it." Richard Ashford looked at his daughter. "Yes," he said. "I'd like that." Yeah. The dinner at Weston Avenue was not a formal thing. Owen made pasta. Lily set the table, which included a brief debate about whether 5 people needed 2 serving bowls or one very large one, settled in favor of 2. Charlotte arrived with her father at 7, which meant she'd spent the afternoon with him. Museums, the lakefront, the kind of walking around that 2 people do when they're trying to occupy the same space without the pressure of having to talk every second. When Charlotte came through the door, Lily was already in the hallway. "Hi," Lily said to Charlotte. "Hi," Charlotte said. Then, stepping aside, "This is my father, Richard. Dad, this is Lily." Richard Ashford looked down at Lily Mercer, 9 years old, gap-toothed, regarding him with the direct assessment she gave to all new things. "Hi," Lily said. "Hello," Richard said, with the slightly stiff warmth of someone who was out of practice with children. Lily studied him for a moment. "You look like Charlotte," she said. "Around the eyes." Richard blinked. "I've been told that." "It's the paying attention thing," Lily said. "You both look like you're paying attention even when you're not saying much." She considered this. "It runs in families sometimes." Richard looked at Charlotte. Charlotte looked at Lily with the expression Owen called the Lily face, which was not a face he could fully describe except to say it was what happened when you encountered Lily doing exactly what Lily did and didn't have any defense prepared. "Come in, Owen said from the kitchen doorway, saving everyone. "Dinner's almost ready." They sat around the kitchen table, which was designed for 4 and managed 5 with some arrangement of chairs. Owen had found a 5th chair in the garage, an old one, slightly unsteady on one leg, which Charlotte identified immediately and switched for Richard without drawing attention to it, in the practiced way of someone who manages logistics as instinct. Owen noticed, said nothing, loved her a little more for it, quietly, in the way that small things accumulate into something you can no longer imagine being without. Richard Ashford sat in Owen Mercer's kitchen, in a house he'd never been to before, in a city he hadn't visited in years, and looked around at the drawings on the refrigerator and the pencil marks on the doorframe and the oak tree visible through the kitchen window, enormous and green with the first full flush of spring leaves. He looked at his daughter, who was helping set out bread with the ease of someone who knew where things were kept. He looked at Owen, who moved through his own kitchen with the unhurried competence of a man who is comfortable in his life. He looked at Lily, who was explaining to no one in particular the precise amount of Parmesan that constituted an appropriate versus an excessive quantity. "Lily," Owen said, "let people serve themselves." "I'm setting a baseline," Lily said. You're setting an agenda. Those are the same thing in cooking. Richard made a sound, brief, involuntary, something that might have been a laugh before he'd caught it. Lily looked at him, a slow smile, the gap in her teeth. You can have more Parmesan if you want, she told him. I was just setting a starting point. I appreciate that, Richard said, with a gravity that matched hers entirely. Lily appeared satisfied. She sat down. They ate. The conversation moved the way dinner conversations in small kitchens do, not in one direction, not controlled, but tracing its own route through whatever the five of them happened to be, which turned out to be enough. Richard asked Owen about Mercer Building Services, and Owen answered without performing modesty or ambition, just described it. The work, the people, the particular satisfaction of fixing something broken. Richard asked Lily about school, and Lily answered with the comprehensive precision of someone who has been asked and intends to respond fully. And Richard listened the way Charlotte listened when Lily talked, really listened, not performing attention. Charlotte noticed this, felt something complicated move through her. Her father, who had not known what to do with her at 12, was sitting in a kitchen in Chicago listening to a 9-year-old describe her theory of historical narrative simplification with the expression of a person who found it genuinely interesting. She thought, he wasn't equipped. He said that. He wasn't equipped, and he didn't get equipped in time, and 30 years happened. She thought, he's here now. She thought, that matters, and also doesn't fix anything, and both things are true, and you have to hold both. She was learning to hold both. After dinner, Lily showed Richard the telescope. Of course she did. The telescope was Lily's primary conversational currency with new people she'd decided to invest in. She explained focal length and Jupiter's moons and Europa with the authority of someone who had done her research, and Richard Ashford, who had degrees from 2 universities and had run a financial consultancy for 30 years, listened with the particular humility of a man being educated by someone who hadn't been born yet when he thought he already knew most things. She's extraordinary, he said quietly to Charlotte when Lily had moved to show Owen something in the telescope book. I know, Charlotte said. And Owen, I know, Charlotte said again. Richard looked at his daughter. You're happy, he said. Not a question, an observation, the same careful eyes observation she'd been making her whole life without knowing it came from him. She thought about it the honest way. I'm becoming it, she said. I'm figuring out what it actually is, which is different from what I thought. What did you think it was? Achievement, she said. Security. Having built enough that nothing could take it away. And now? Charlotte looked at the kitchen. Owen and Lily bent over the telescope book, heads together, Lily pointing at something, Owen squinting at the print in the way he did when he needed glasses and refused to admit it yet. She looked at the pencil marks on the door frame, at the drawing on the refrigerator, at the blue ornament she'd given Lily for her Christmas stocking, which Lily had declared was going on the tree permanently because blue was underrepresented. Now I think it's this, Charlotte said. Whatever this is. I don't have a cleaner definition than that. Richard was quiet for a moment. Your mother used to say that happiness was mostly just paying attention. Charlotte looked at him. She said that? Often. He looked at his hands. I wasn't always good at listening. I'm better now. Too late in some ways, not entirely too late in others. Charlotte sat with this. She thought about paying attention, about a man who grabbed elevator doors without deciding to, about a child who looked for water first when she entered a room, about what it meant to be somewhere, actually somewhere, not just present in the room while your mind was already in the next one. Not entirely too late, Charlotte said carefully to her father. He looked at her. His eyes, which were her eyes, were doing the thing. No, he said. Not entirely. Spring became summer the way Chicago summers did, all at once. Everyone outside, the lake crowded, the city releasing 8 months of held breath in a collective exhale. Mercer Building Services took on 2 new commercial contracts in June, which meant Owen hired 3 additional technicians and moved to a slightly larger office, one with a window that faced something other than a parking structure. He set Elena's photo on the new desk. He set Lily's laminated drawing beside it. He set a second photo, taken at Easter at the kitchen table, Slightly blurry because Lily had taken it and she was 9, and phone cameras required some operator error. Owen and Charlotte both looking at the camera, not posed, just caught at the right second, the oak tree visible through the window behind them. He set it on the desk, looked at the 3 photos. Then he went to work. Charlotte scaled back. Not entirely. She wouldn't have been herself if she'd scaled back entirely. And she'd made a separate peace with being who she was while also being willing to add to it rather than replace. She stepped back from 3 board commitments that had been largely ceremonial and made Marcus take her off 2 recurring calls that his own capable judgment could handle. She blocked Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday evenings in her calendar with a meeting title that said personal, and she kept it, imperfectly. She missed it sometimes when things erupted, and she made up for it. And over time, the ratio of kept to missed improved because she was practicing. She was practicing a lot of things. They didn't all get easier at the same rate. Being present was still the hardest one. Some evenings she sat at Owen's kitchen table and felt her mind pull toward the things she hadn't finished, the email she hadn't sent, the integration issue she'd been meaning to look at, and she'd have to actively choose to set it down, not because she didn't care about the work, but because she was teaching herself that choosing the room she was in was not the same as abandoning everything outside it. Owen didn't call her on it when it happened. He'd just say something that required her attention. Not manipulatively, just naturally, the way people in the same room naturally speak to each other. And she'd come back. He was patient in a way that wasn't passive. Patient in the way of someone who trusted that she was working on it and didn't need to be managed. She didn't always know what to do with that trust. She kept it anyway. Lily was 9 3/4, which was a distinction she maintained was significant, and she was reading at a level that had begun to concern her teachers in the best possible way. She'd started corresponding with a children's science museum about their astronomy programs after discovering that their telescope was larger than Charlotte's and requesting access to it for a school project, a request they'd initially declined and then reconsidered after receiving a follow-up letter from Lily that her teacher had read aloud to the faculty lounge with a mixture of awe and helpless laughter. Charlotte had proofread the follow-up letter. She hadn't told Owen this. Owen found out eventually because Lily told him, because Lily told Owen everything, eventually. Charlotte made me take out 1 sentence, Lily reported. She said it crossed a line from persuasive to aggressive. What did the sentence say? Owen asked. Lily recited it from memory. Owen looked at Charlotte. She's not wrong that it was aggressive, Charlotte said. It was effective, Lily said. It would have gotten the letter filed in the wrong place, Charlotte said. Effective means getting the outcome, not just expressing the feeling. Lily considered this. That's a more sophisticated definition of effective than I was using. I know, Charlotte said. Write it down. Lily wrote it down. She kept a small notebook of things Charlotte said that she categorized without telling Charlotte as useful. The notebook had 17 entries by July. Owen had found the notebook once. He'd read it. He'd put it back exactly where he'd found it and never mentioned it, but he thought about it sometimes. Those 17 entries, Charlotte's words filtered through Lily's attention, kept and categorized and treated as worth keeping. He thought about worth keeping a lot that summer. About what it meant to build something again after you'd lost something, about how the 2 things could coexist, the loss and the building, without one erasing the other. He'd been afraid for a long time that loving someone new was a kind of arithmetic, that you subtracted Elena to add Charlotte, that the new thing could only exist in the space the old thing had vacated. Didn't work like that. He'd been wrong. Elena was in the pencil marks on the doorframe. She was in Lily's curly hair and in the blue ornament on the tree they'd kept because she'd been right about blue being underrepresented. She was in the recipe box on the kitchen counter, in her handwriting on index cards, chicken soup and tamales, and the wedding cake they'd made themselves that turned out lopsided and tasted perfect. She was in the way Lily sat, that particular way, left elbow on the table, chin in hand, looking at something she was thinking hard about. She was in the house she'd chosen. She was in the garden she hadn't gotten to plant, which Owen had planted that spring, tomatoes along the south fence, herbs near the back door, 1 bed of wildflowers he couldn't have named but that she'd cut from a picture in a magazine once and taped to the refrigerator with a note that said someday. He'd planted them. He'd thought of it as someday arriving, finally. Charlotte had helped him dig the bed on a Saturday in April, getting her hands dirty in a way that she approached with the focus of someone learning a new skill, which was how she approached most things, and which he'd stopped finding remarkable because it had become simply her. She wasn't naturally comfortable with the outdoors or with soil or with not knowing what she was doing, and she did it anyway, and by the end of the afternoon she'd looked at the bed they'd dug and the seeds they'd planted and said, "How long until they come up?" "Weeks," Owen said. She'd looked slightly impatient. "You can't rush it," he said. "I know I can't rush it," she said. "I'm working on accepting that." He'd looked at her. Dirty hands, slight streak of soil on her cheek she didn't know about, the late April afternoon making the yard gold. "You're doing okay," he said. "Don't grade me," she said. "I wasn't grading you. You had a tone." "I had an affectionate tone." Charlotte had looked at him for a moment, then she'd looked at the seedbed. "Fine," she said. "I'm doing okay." The wildflowers came up in June. Charlotte stood at the kitchen window looking at them one Thursday evening while Owen made coffee and Lily did homework at the table, and she didn't say anything about them. She just looked for a moment and then came and sat at the table. Owen had noticed. He noticed most things she didn't say, the way she noticed most things he didn't say because they'd been paying attention long enough now that the unsaid things were visible. In August, Owen took Lily to visit Elena's family in San Diego, a trip they made every summer, a week with Elena's parents and her younger sister, people who held Elena in the living form of their memory rather than the fading form of time. People who said, "Lily, you sound more like her every year," and meant it as the gift it was. Charlotte didn't go. Owen hadn't asked and she hadn't offered because it was right, and they both knew it was right, and neither of them needed to discuss why. She texted him the first night. "How is it?" He called instead of texting back, which surprised her. "Elena's mom made tamales," he said. "The recipe's different from the card in our box. I asked her why, and she said Elena modified it when she was in college and never wrote down the modifications." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "Is that—" "It's okay," he said. "It's actually good. It means she took something and made it her own." He paused. "I think about that sometimes. She was like that with most things." "She sounds like someone who left marks everywhere she went," Charlotte said. "She did," Owen said. "I'm glad she did." They talked for an hour. Not about anything consequential, Lily's day, the San Diego weather, a book Charlotte was reading that she'd told him about 3 times in different contexts, and he'd been meaning to read. Just talking in the dark of their separate temporary evenings, 800 miles apart, and not particularly far. When they hung up, Charlotte sat in her penthouse in the August Chicago night and thought about leaving marks. About what it meant to make yourself part of something, not because you needed to claim it, but because you were genuinely there, and being somewhere real leaves something behind. She thought about the wildflowers in the backyard at Weston Avenue, about the entry in Lily's notebook, about Richard Ashford, who had called her last week for no particular reason to tell her about a book, and with whom she'd had a 20-minute conversation about nothing that had nonetheless felt like the most real conversation they'd had in 20 years. She thought, "I'm starting to leave marks." She thought, "This is what it means to be somewhere." September brought Lily's birthday, which she'd been planning since July with the methodical ambition she brought to everything important. She wanted a party that involved the telescope, which meant it had to be at night, which meant it had to be on a weekend, which meant negotiations with Owen about bedtime and with Charlotte about her schedule that Lily conducted separately and with the tactical precision of someone managing 2 supply chains simultaneously. The party was 12 9-year-olds in Owen's backyard on a Saturday in late September, past what would normally be considered a reasonable hour, looking through Charlotte's telescope, which Charlotte had transported to Weston Avenue in the back of a car, because Lily had asked and because the transport was technically complex enough that Charlotte found it satisfying to solve. Jupiter was visible. Saturn was visible, rings faint but present. Lily narrated both with the authority of someone who had been studying this for a year and the generosity of someone who wanted other people to find it as remarkable as she did. Charlotte stood at the edge of the yard and watched 12 children argue gently over telescope time, and Owen stood beside her and Gerald stood above them both, enormous in the September dark. "She's in her element," Owen said. She's always in her element, Charlotte said. That's the thing about her. She doesn't need the environment to suit her. She suits herself to it, and then makes it hers. Owen looked at Charlotte. When did you figure that out? Probably the first night, Charlotte said, when she walked past the toys to look at the lake. He nodded, looked at Lily, who was explaining the difference between seeing Saturn and seeing Saturn's rings to a child who had apparently not previously understood there was a difference. She loves you, Owen said. Charlotte was quiet. She does, he said. Not pressuring, just telling her what was true, because he thought she needed to hear it clearly. She's not a kid who loves easily or indiscriminately. She picked you deliberately. Charlotte watched Lily at the telescope, 9 3/4, going on 45, formidable in the process of becoming, her mother's hair silver lit by the moon. I know, Charlotte said. Her voice was not quite even. And Owen stopped. He'd started and stopped this particular sentence a few times, in private, alone, working out whether the timing was right, or whether there was a right timing, or whether waiting for right timing was just another version of making complicated the thing that was actually simple. Charlotte turned to look at him. I love you, he said. Quiet. Plain. The way he said true things, without embellishment, without the staging that would have made it feel like an announcement rather than a fact. I wanted to say it clearly, and I haven't, so there it is. Charlotte looked at him in the backyard of the house Elena had chosen, with Gerald above them and 12 children arguing about Saturn behind them and the September sky clear and enormous overhead. She thought about the elevator doors, about a diner on Wabash, about a torn contract in small pieces on a coat check counter, about 5 months of Thursday evenings and pasta and a cookbook with margin notes and a wildflower bed and a telescope transported across the city for a 9-year-old's birthday party. She thought about what Lily had told her at the beginning. He's not the kind of person you can borrow and put back. She thought, I'm not borrowing, I'm here. I know, she said, which was not the same as saying it back but was also not nothing. Owen heard the architecture of it, understood what she was working toward, gave her the space to get there in her own time. She looked at him. I'm not good at this, she said. I know. I'm better than I was. I know that too. She looked at Lily, who had turned from the telescope to check on Charlotte with the peripheral monitoring system she ran at all times, caught Charlotte's eye, and gave a small, decisive nod before turning back to her guests, as if she'd been checking a variable and found it satisfactory. Charlotte looked at Owen. I love you, she said. It came out slightly unpracticed, which was right. It should come out unpracticed, because it was the first time she'd said it to anyone in a long time, and things that have been unused for a long time don't work perfectly the first time back. But it was true, which was the only part that actually required precision, and he heard the truth in it. Owen nodded, not a large nod, not a performance, just the receiving of a true thing. I know, he said. They stood there in the backyard. Saturn's rings were visible. 12 children were arguing about whose turn it was. Gerald's leaves moved in the September air. Somewhere inside the house, in the kitchen, Elena's handwritten recipe cards were in a box on the counter, and beside them was a cookbook with margin notes in a different handwriting, and on the door frame were pencil marks going back to when Lily was 3, and somewhere on the refrigerator there was a blurry Easter photograph of 2 people not posing, and on the mantel, the photographs of Elena still stood exactly where they had always stood. None of it canceled any of it out. All of it was true at once. That was the thing Owen had learned, and Charlotte was learning, and Lily, in her 9 3/4 wisdom, had probably always understood. Love doesn't replace. It accumulates. It finds room not by moving things out, but by making the space larger, and the space is always larger than you thought. This was not a perfect family. Owen still forgot to make appointments and worked too many Saturdays when contracts stacked up. Charlotte still had evenings where her mind was somewhere else, and she had to be pulled back to the room she was in. Lily still made arguments that technically crossed from persuasive to aggressive, and had to be reminded of the distinction. The porch step had been fixed, but the upstairs window was still drafty, and the basement still flooded in a bad rain, and there was a drawer in the kitchen that had been stuck for 2 years and nobody had gotten to it. None of them were who they'd been at the beginning of this. They were also, each of them, still themselves. Still the particular collection of damage and capacity and stubbornness and love that they'd arrived with. Changed, but not replaced. Added to, but not rewritten. That was the only version of this that was actually real. Lily stepped back from the telescope and looked at the sky directly. Tilted her head back. The whole sky in her field of vision. No magnification, just the scale of the thing. "It's so big," she said, to no one in particular. "It is," Owen said. "And we're so small," she said. "But we're here." She said it the way she said most things, as an observation, a fact, neither particularly comforting nor distressing, just accurate. They were here, in this yard, under this sky, with Gerald's leaves in the wind and the telescope aimed at Saturn, and the house full of pencil marks and photographs and recipe cards, and a kitchen drawer that was still stuck and probably would be for another year at least, but which no one had stopped existing because of. They were here. That was in the end the whole of it, the whole sufficient, ordinary, extraordinary thing.